Chapter 376. I always feel that something is missing in my life. On the last day of March in Jiangnan, the spring rain silently fell on the pavilion in Hua Garden, gently like the gentle ripples of lovers looking at each other. Below the pavilion, a man and woman were lying on two comfortable chairs and talking. Haitang glanced at Fan Xian and shook her head. This life of yours can be said to be complete. What regrets do you have? Fan Xian thought carefully about his past in this life. It could indeed be said to be high-spirited and reckless. He had money, power, and people. He had all the pleasures that others could have. He could also have the pleasures that others could not. For some reason, he was very dissatisfied. He knew very well how a person should live their life. But when he really lived like this, the unknown desire in his heart grew stronger and stronger. It had nothing to do with ideals and illusory things. With a pained expression, he said, "There was once an emperor." When he was old and muddle-headed, he thought back to the past and said that he had 10 great martial arts and could be called a perfect old man. Of course, when this emperor was young, he was also a muddle-headed ghost. He was an emperor, and he was much more arrogant than me. But I don't want to be a muddle-headed ghost. I don't think there is such a thing as perfect in this world. Do you want to be emperor? Haitang asked with a not-quite-there smile. She asked a question that everyone around Fan Xian, even Wang Qinian, the most trusted of trusted aides, did not dare to ask. Haitang felt that Fan Xian was truly a wonderful person. Hearing a northern Qi person like her ask such a treasonous question, he did not hide it at all. On the contrary, he sank directly into deep thought. If outsiders saw this, they would certainly think that Fan Xian had already developed thoughts of disloyalty. Being an emperor is too tiring, Fan Xian said with a headache. Fan Xian said with a headache, "Your emperor, my emperor, although they seem to be living comfortably, it is exhausting. It is truly meaningless." Haitang smiled slightly and said, "I think being an imperial envoy is not much easier than being an emperor." Fan Xian smiled bitterly and said, "To be an emperor, you have to see tens of thousands of people die in front of you and not have your heart tremble. I truly cannot do this." Haitang said with slight surprise, "Don't you always think of yourself as ruthless in front of me?" "I can kill a dozen or 100 people," Fan Xian said seriously. Fan Xian said seriously, "If I were to swim in a sea of blood, I don't know if I would have the courage to do so." Quantitative change leads to qualitative change. I've told you before. He waved his hand and did not want to continue this boring topic. He lay on the chair and carefully listened to the subtle sound of the spring rain moistening the earth. The pavilion gradually fell into silence. In a moment, an official of the Overwatch Council wearing a robe silently appeared at the entrance to the back of Hua Garden. The rain had soaked through his official robe and made his entire body exude a cold aura. It was Deng Ziyu, who had just come from Jingdo. Haitang smiled and said, "It seems like you will continue to be busy and continue your plan to kill fewer people." After saying this, the girl did not wait for Fan Xian's reply. Very naturally, she put her hands into her large pockets. Dragging her feet and swaying her waist, she used the country girl's walk to leave the little pavilion. Fan Xian smiled slightly as he watched Haitang's departing figure. He only saw her gently swaying away in the light rain. The raindrops wet the hair at her temples. It looked like this girl had not used the Jinqi of Tianyi Dao. It was said to be close to nature, so naturally it was so. However, her feet, which were wearing cloth shoes, were not stained by the puddles on the ground. It looked like she had done something. Deng Ziyu saw Haitang leave and then silently entered the pavilion. He opened his mouth and said, "Just like yesterday, the court is still tangling with the articles of the Qing law. Although Song Shuren is sharp-tongued and has not lost much ground, in reality, there has been no progress. As long as the Suzhou government holds onto the Qing law and does not let go, even with Xia Qifei's will in hand, he will not be able to win this case." Fan Xian nodded his head to indicate that he understood. He then sank deep into thought. Today was the last day of March. The Ming family property case that had shaken Jiangnan had progressed to its 4th day. After experiencing the storm of the first day, the trial of the next few days had sunk into an impasse. Although this was within Fan Xian's expectations, Fan Xian was a bit impatient to have to listen to the reports of his subordinates every day. On the first day of the trial, Song Shuren had cleverly used the will to confirm that Xia Qifei was a descendant of the Ming family. This news immediately spread from the Suzhou government to all of Jiangnan. Now, everyone knew that the seventh young master of the Ming family had come back to life and was fighting over the family property with the eldest branch of the Ming family. However, the Qin law was established in accordance with the spirit of scriptures. The natural right of inheritance of the eldest legitimate son had long been deeply rooted in the hearts of the people and was written clearly in the law. The will seemed to have already played its historical role. It was difficult for it to be of much help to Xia Qifei's wishes. If Xia Qifei wanted to take back the Ming family's enormous property, it was the same as overturning a rule that people had followed for thousands of years. This rule was so powerful that it could not be overturned by one person. Not only could Fan Xian not do it, even the Qing emperor was afraid. If he used this case to break the natural right of inheritance of the eldest legitimate son, the effects would be too great. Fan Xian furrowed his brows and suddenly thought of a strange matter. If the influence of the Ming family property case continued to expand to the point of drawing out a great debate that liberated the mind, then what about the natural position of the crown prince in the palace? He sucked in a breath of cold air. This plan had been drawn up by Yan Bingyun and had also been approved by Chen Pingping. That old and far-sighted cripple could not have thought of the consequences of this matter. Could it be that the old cripple had received the emperor's secret instructions to begin to shake the atmosphere of public opinion on the crown prince's natural inheritance? The Jiangnan Ming family matter was very big, but if it affected Jingdou, then the matter would become even bigger. It was to the point that Fan Xian did not want to see this situation. Because of his mother, Fan Xian could not just watch as the crown prince inherited the throne and the empress, who wanted to kill him, became the empress dowager. However, in the current situation, directly provoking the crown prince could cause the crown prince to let go of past grievances and unite with the eldest princess and the second prince. Such an outcome was something Fan Xian did not want to see at the moment. Fan Xian sank into silence. His original order to Song Shuren was to do his best to drag out this case and make this case spectacular. The bigger the impact, the better. Only now did he discover that some of the old cripple's thoughts were hidden behind this matter. He trusted Chen Pingping, but it seemed that Chen Pingping had always wanted to protect him for some reason and had not pointed out many things to him. Fan Xian was a person who was very willing to learn to understand and control the situation. Looks like after the Ming family matter temporarily settles, I will actually have to make a trip to Wuzhou. He sighed and felt more and more that his father arranging for him to go to Wuzhou to see his father-in-law was a wise decision. It looked like his father had long known that he would certainly have some misgivings about the situation in court. Now that he was far away from Jingdou, the only person who could truly help him solve the problem face to face was the Prime Minister. Deng Ziyu could not guess Fan Xian's true worry, but he could see that the commissioner had different thoughts about the Ming family property case. He furrowed his brows and asked, "Should we have Song Shuren close the case?" In any case, Xia Qifei's identity as one of the seventh sons of the Ming family has been confirmed. In a few days, the Overwatch Council will come forward and have him worship his ancestors and return to the family. According to Qing law, the Ming family will have to give him some shares. Although those shares are not very eye-catching, they have reached your earlier goal and allowed him to successfully enter the inner circle of the Ming family. Fan Xian listened to Deng Ziyu's analysis and felt slightly comforted. It did feel good to have a trusted aide at his side. However, he did not reply to his question. Instead, he asked carefully, "Have the fourth bureau arrange for Xia Qifei? Oh, he should be called Ming Qingqing now. Have Ming Qingqing meet with the fourth of the Ming family. How is this going?" Since Xia Qifei was going to be like a thorn in the Ming family's throat, he would have to collude with some of the dissidents within the Ming family. Fan Xian did not have a detailed understanding of the dark and dirty dealings of the rich and powerful families, but in his previous life, he had watched the Hong Kong TVB dramas countless times. Deng Ziyu reported, "It has already been arranged. Have Xia Qifei meet with the fourth of the Ming family at the beginning of next month." Fan Xian nodded, and only then did he begin to talk about the earlier question. Gently biting his itchy inner lip, he calmly said, "Still have Song Shuren continue to fight. Keep this case going. The bigger the momentum, the better. Even if we can't win, we can't lose. Put pressure on the Suzhou government and don't let them forcefully close the case. Keep fighting until all the gentry and people under heaven are thinking about that problem." Deng Ziyu raised his head and said with slight astonishment, "Sir, what problem?" Only now did Fan Xian realize that he had let it slip. He smiled and thought for a while. He didn't plan on hiding it from this trusted aide in front of him and said, "I want everyone under heaven to start thinking about whether or not the eldest legitimate son should naturally inherit the family property." As the chief of the Qinian unit, Deng Ziyu understood everything about Fan Xian very clearly. Hearing the commissioner's words, he pondered it for a moment and understood the meaning behind it. His face paled in shock and he raised his hands in a salute to dissuade him. "Sir, you can't. If the court and palace suspect your intentions, it will not be easy to clean up." Fan Xian lowered his eyelids slightly and said, "Ziyu, you seem to have forgotten my identity. My surname is Fan. Don't worry too much. As for suspecting my intentions, I'm afraid the nobles in the palace will suspect that I have overstepped my duty as a teacher." He had already thought it through. In any case, he would have to face the Eastern Palace sooner or later. At this time, he would follow Qin Pingping's intentions and stab the other party. In any case, given his present power and position, as long as it wasn't a rebellion, no one could do anything to him. Furthermore, even if some people thought that he was creating this kind of public opinion for his own future, more people would think that Fan Xian was making arrangements for the third prince. "Don't report this matter to the director," Fan Xian ordered. "It is only a small matter." Deng Ziyu was completely unable to hide his shock and fear. He smiled bitterly and thought that the propaganda campaign for the fight for the heir had officially begun. Was it still a small matter? Fan Xian thought of something and suddenly laughed in spite of himself. Song Shuren is nothing more than a litigator. Is he the fulcrum that moves the earth? Perhaps I'm overcomplicating this matter. Debating the Qing law in court probably has little to do with the old rules of the world. Deng Ziyu didn't understand the words earth, but he guessed the general meaning. He smiled bitterly and replied, "Song Shuren meeting Chen Wuchang can truly be described as a general meeting a talented person. The two sides fight with sparks flying everywhere. It's not just about Qing law. If the contents of their debate in court were to spread, it would probably make people think more about that problem." Fan Xian's interest was piqued. "Oh, then I have to go take a look. Go call the third prince and Dabao. In a bit, the whole family will go to the Suzhou government to watch the show." Deng Ziyu smiled bitterly and accepted the order. Under the cover of the fine rain, 3 completely black carriages left Hua Garden and slowly drove to the street closest to the Suzhou government office. The people in Hua Garden were going to eat lunch. At this time, the Suzhou government was also temporarily resting, so no one was in a hurry. Although it was the food street closest to the Suzhou government, it was still quite far away. Sitting on the 3rd floor of the Suzhou branch of Xinfeng restaurant, Fan Xian leaned against the railing and looked in the direction of the Suzhou government through the layers of rain. Angrily, he said, "I'm not a clairvoyant. How am I supposed to watch the show?" Deng Ziyu had sent people to book the restaurant earlier and was now setting up defenses. Hearing the commissioner's scolding, he couldn't help but smile bitterly and say, "Commissioner, this is already the closest. Although the whole family is going out to watch the show, it's not good to drive 3 large carriages to the Suzhou government and alarm the government. It will also make the common people's eyes open. It really won't do." Fan Xian sighed and said, "If I had known it would be like this, I would have just eaten Yang Jimei's cook at home. Why would I come out in the rain?" As he spoke, someone pulled on the corner of his clothes from behind. He turned his head to look and saw it was the charmingly naive Dabao. He couldn't help asking in surprise, "Dabao, what is it?" Dabao grinned and said, "Xiao Xian, this home also has a receiving bun." Dabao used his thick finger to point at the table. In a single steamer, there was a single large white steamed bun. It was bustling with activity, and the fragrance inside gradually overflowed. Fan Xian sighed and sat by Dabao's side. As he used his chopsticks to separate the steamed bun, He took out a spoon and ladled the oil from the bun into Dabao's bowl. With a smile, he said, "This is also Xinfeng Restaurant, except it's a branch in Suzhou." The shopkeeper of Xinfeng Restaurant, who had been carefully waiting on him to the side, quickly and attentively said, "Yes, young Master Lin, although Jiangnan is far away, the taste is not much different from Jingdou. Try it." Dabao mumbled a few inarticulate words and then began to attack the bun in front of him, leaving the shopkeeper cold to the side. It was Fan Xian who was a bit curious and asked, "Shopkeeper, how can you say the words young Master Lin?" The shopkeeper laughed dryly and said fawningly, "What are you saying, Commissioner? In the old branch in Jingdou, you often take young Master Lin to Xinfeng Restaurant to eat. This is a great honor for our little restaurant. Every time the old shopkeeper brings this up, he is incomparably proud and indescribably grateful. Although I am often in Suzhou, I know of your relationship with Xinfeng Restaurant. How could I not serve you attentively?" Fan Xian personally controlled the first bureau in Jingdou. The restaurant closest to the first bureau yamen was Xinfeng Restaurant, so he often took Dabao to eat their receiving buns. At that time, as long as it was a noble person eating, no matter when, they would put on a grand display and hold a large banquet. There were not many people of Fan Xian's status who were so interested in receiving buns and zhajiang noodles. Thus, although Xinfeng Restaurant was delicious, because of its homely style, even though it opened 3 branches in the Qing Kingdom and had a great reputation, its business was always ordinary. It was not until later, because it often received Fan Xian and Lin Dabao, that Xinfeng Restaurant gradually raised its level in Jingdou. It attracted countless students and scholars who wanted to sit in the seat that the immortal poet once sat in and taste the buns that Sir Fan Jr. could not forget. This made the old shopkeeper of Xinfeng Restaurant unable to contain his joy. The Suzhou branch shopkeeper knew that Fan Xian was his honored guest, so he flattered him like a tide. Furthermore, he was particularly attentive in laying out seasonings to remove the fishy smell. It made Fan Xian feel very comfortable. For a moment, even the gloom of not being able to see the scene in the Suzhou government had mostly disappeared. Fan Xian was eating noodles and Dabao was nibbling on buns. The third prince was eating a bowl of glutinous rice balls with a steadiness that did not match his age. Cici led a few serving girls to drink 2 bowls of porridge. She then stood under the eaves and watched the rain falling from the sky. She stretched out the eaves to catch it. Laughing happily, it was very lively. Fan Xian never cared much about his servants, so these girls were very lively. Hearing the laughter coming from behind him, his mood also improved. Waving his hand to summon Deng Ziyu, he said, "The Suzhou government should have already begun. Send someone to listen. It would be best if they could copy something for us to see." Deng Ziyu nodded and went to arrange for people. Fan Xian waved his hand again to have Gouda and the other tiger guards go to the side to eat. Only then did he return to his work with the bowl of noodles. Naturally, he could not avoid once again stealing a piece of minced meat from Dabao's plate to eat. Dabao was as quiet as usual. His large stature expressed a small hidden bitterness. Haitang was nowhere to be found. At this moment, in Xinfeng Restaurant, it was filled with Fan Xian's subordinates, servants, and family. He was very relaxed and happy as he admired the rain and picked at the white noodles, throwing all the thoughts in his mind to the side. Seeing that Dabao had finished eating, Fan Xian asked warmly if he still wanted more. Dabao shook his head. Fan Xian took out a handkerchief from his clothes and carefully wiped away the oil and water by the side of Dabao's mouth. The third prince looked at this scene and felt slightly surprised. A strange expression flashed through his eyes. The tiger guards at the table to the side also froze. Everyone knew of Fan Xian's love and care for Dabao. But, seeing this scene, there were still many people who could not connect Fan Xian with that ruthless and harsh Overwatch Council official. In the past, when they ate at Xinfeng Restaurant, this scene had moved Deng Ziyu and Mu Tai. Today, the tiger guards and the third prince might have a new view of Fan Xian. For an idiotic brother-in-law to be so attentive, it could not be simply explained with, "Love me, love my dog." Although Fan Xian did indeed love and respect his wife, if these details had always been a disguise Fan Xian used to buy people's hearts, no one would believe it. To do this from the bottom of his heart for so long, If that person was not a great evil, then he was a saint. Which kind was Fan Xian? In the rainy season of the Jiangnan waterways, it was impossible to have the saying that spring rain was as precious as oil. Thus, the fine rain gradually grew heavier. Heaven was not stingy in watering the earth. Fan Xian narrowed his eyes and looked at the rain outside the eaves, but his thoughts had already turned elsewhere. The council report had made it clear that this year, the rainfall upstream of the Yangtze River was not very abundant. Although it would have some effect on the restoration of the disaster areas, at least for now, he did not have to worry about the terrifying monster of spring floods. Thus, the matter of repairing the river works could continue smoothly. At this time, Yang Wanli should have just reported to Jingdou. It would probably still take some time before he could reach the river transport governor's yamen. As for the silver needed for the river works, the palace treasury bidding this time was 80% more than in previous years. On the surface, the amount had already been sealed. After a series of complicated procedures, it began to be transported to Jingdou. First, it entered the palace treasury. Then, by the emperor's decree, a certain amount was drawn into the national treasury and then sent to the river transport governor's yamen. Secretly, with the full cooperation of the Overwatch Council and Ministry of Revenue, and the careful accounting of the old officials Fan Xian's father had sent, a large sum of silver had already begun to be sent through different channels directly to the places needed by the river transport. The names used had already been prepared. Of this large sum of silver, a portion came from the palace treasury bidding silver and the amount of silver that the transport company had painstakingly squeezed out. There was also a large portion of silver that Fan Xian had temporarily borrowed from the Northern Qi Emperor through Haiti. In any case, the silver was placed in Taiping Money House. Fan Xian would use it first. As for returning it, that would have to wait for Xia Qifei to connect with Fan Xizha in the north and use the smuggled goods from the palace treasury to slowly return it. Although Fan Xian had done his best to cover up these matters, and the matter concerning the Northern Qi Emperor was covered up even more securely so that the Qin court in Jingdou would not hear any wind of it, the matter of transporting the silver to the river transport had long been mentioned by Fan Xian in a secret memorial to the emperor. Fan Xian had no selfish motives in this matter. He didn't even earn a single tael of silver. Furthermore, the entire matter had been operated in secret. It was impossible for Fan Xian to gain any reputation for loving the people from this matter. All of the benefits that had been created belonged to the people of the Qin kingdom. In the end, it was also the emperor who had benefited. Naturally, the emperor had tacitly agreed to this matter. Presently, the only question Fan Xian needed to explain to the emperor was how exactly he had obtained this large sum of silver. Since he couldn't say the Northern Qi Emperor, this great financial backer, he needed a good reason. Fan Xian had already made arrangements for this matter at the beginning of his plan. A portion of it was the bribes he had obtained from his 2 years of official business. Another portion was the benefits he had obtained from overthrowing the Cui family last year, and another portion was the land he had scraped from the palace treasury transport company after he went to Jiangnan. In the future, if he still couldn't reconcile the accounts with the emperor, Fan Xian still had one last move. He would say that this silver was left to him by Uncle Wu Zhu. He didn't think the emperor would go find Wu Zhu to confront. If the river transport was really good, perhaps the emperor would be pleased and use this year's generous palace treasury bidding silver to return a portion to Fan Xian. As for the Ming family, Fan Xian had his own arrangements. The investigation was slowly progressing. However, at the moment, it was all covered up by that dazzling lawsuit. For Fan Xian, dealing with the Ming family was indeed a long-term task. He could only gradually nibble away at it. If his methods were too fierce and he suppressed the Ming family too much, it would affect the stability of Jiangnan. The Jiangnan governor, Xue Qing, would probably be the first person to stand up and oppose it. For the rule of a dynasty, stability had always been an overwhelming requirement. The survival of the Ming family was not actually on the Jiangnan lawsuit. Rather, it was on the struggle in the Jingdou palace. If the master of the Ming family, the eldest princess, and the princes fell in the struggle for power, the Ming family would find it difficult to protect their basket of eggs. If Fan Xian lost, the Ming family would be able to raise their eyebrows again, and Xia Qifei would have to flee in all directions like a stray dog. If Fan Xian and the eldest princess continued to maintain their current situation of neither rising nor falling, then the Ming family would only be like it was now. Suppressed by Fan Xian to the point of struggling at death's door, but it would never collapse. It would stubbornly and humbly live on, struggling and waiting. "Sir." A light call pulled Fan Xian out of his thoughts. He shook his head dizzily. Only now did he realize that the light outside was much dimmer than before. It was not only because the rain was getting heavier, but it was also because it was getting late. Only now did he realize that his thoughts had taken up so much time. Thinking of this, he couldn't help but sigh. It looked like Haitang was right. His days were not much easier than the emperor's. Glancing at Cici, who was already tired from playing and resting by the railing, Fan Xian used his eyes to indicate for a little girl to put a coat on her. He then glanced at Dabao, who was speaking uneasily with the third prince. Only then did he pull himself together and take out his addictions to watching the show. He said to Deng Ziyu, "How is it over there?" Deng Ziyu smiled and handed over the paper in his hand. He moved closer to Fan Xian's ear and said, "These are the arguments recorded in court. Sir, do you want the 8th Bureau to compile these arguments into a collection and publish them throughout the world?" This was a very sinister and daring idea. It looked like Deng Ziyu had finally approved of Fan Xian's way of thinking. He knew that the Overwatch Council would no longer be able to maintain its neutrality like it had in the past in the fight for the throne. Fan Xian laughingly scolded, "It's fine if it's just a rumor, but if it's printed into a book, won't the palace hate me to death?" Hearing the words palace, the third prince at the other table glanced over. Fan Xian pretended not to see inside. Speaking of the 8th Bureau, there are too few people in Jiangnan. That matter has not had any effect up until now. He was talking about the operation to publicize Xia Qifei's story in Jiangnan. Fan Xian had thought that with the 8th Bureau working together, they would be able to beat the second prince until he had no power to retaliate in the battle of rumors in Jingdo. Now, with the tragic story of Xia Qifei losing his mother and being banished as a script, and with the verdict of the Suzhou government as evidence, they could have caused a stir in Jiangnan and completely destroyed the good image the Ming family had built these years. Unexpectedly, the Ming family's power in Jiangnan was so deep. There were too few people in Jiangnan from the 8th Bureau. The Ming family had also sent many storytellers to make noise outside. In any case, they were connecting this family property lawsuit to Xia Qifei's underworld background and the Jingdo officials' conspiracy. Comparing the two, Fan Xian's reputation was much worse. Although the Jiangnan people believed that Xia Qifei was the 7th son of the Ming family, they all thought that the reason Xia Qifei had suddenly jumped out this year was because the Jingdo officials represented by Fan Xian wanted to bully the good people of Jiangnan. Fan Xian thought of this and felt it was funny. It looked like the master of the Ming family, Ming Qingda, who had been pretending to be sick in bed, indeed had a very detailed understanding of his way of doing things. His methods of responding and speed were also incomparably accurate and fast. Ming Qingda was indeed not a simple person. The power was in his hands and not in Jiangnan, so Fan Xian could easily see the dispute with the Ming family as a game. He did not have much enmity toward Ming Qingda. On the contrary, he had a faint admiration. After he read through the paper Deng Ziyu presented, he couldn't resist laughing out loud. There were many wonderful people in Jiangnan, and Song Shuren from Jingdo was not bad either. The lawsuit in the Suzhou government had already gradually left the boundaries of Qing law and was beginning to develop in the direction Chen Pingping hoped for. Both sides quoted classics and discussed classics. Every word they said was the former way. They raised their hands and bowed to Master Zhuang. It did not look like they were fighting a lawsuit. For the sake of the eldest son's right to inheritance, which was deeply rooted in people's hearts, it was like the two sides were holding a lecture before an exhibition. Fan Xian smiled and shook his head. The tense and somewhat absurd scene of the Suzhou government trial seemed to rise before his eyes. In the court of the Suzhou government, the debate was still going on. It was already the 4th day. The main generals of both sides were a bit tired after repeatedly using their brains. Thus, the time between the opening of the court was much longer than the first day. Before much could be said, someone would rush to ask for arrest. The Suzhou Jizhou also understood that Xia Qifei wanted to drag it out, but he had no choice. He had long received the imperial envoy's verbal order for him to judge the case impartially and not carelessly close it. Since he could not carelessly close it, he had to let both sides argue. However, Song Shuren and Chen Wuchang were both famous and talkative characters. If he let them argue, they could probably talk for an entire year. The Suzhou Jizhou had seen it all and was indifferent. Every time both sides asked for arrest, he would smile and allow it. He would also order bailiffs to bring over stools for both sides to sit on. As for things like tea, he would not be lacking. Ming Lansher's face was ashen as he sat on the stool. These days, this young master of the Ming family had also been dragged on miserably. His family's business could not help at all. Those uncles were all useless people who ate and did not do anything. After the palace treasury bidding, the matter of importing goods to North Min needed important figures in the family. Thus, he could only let his father, who had always said he was sick in bed, stand up again and take charge of these matters. The Ming family knew that the imperial envoy wanted to use this case to throw their family into disarray and thus make their family unable to split themselves in the palace treasury business. However, the Ming family did not have a good way to respond, so they could only keep dragging it out with the other side. In any case, looking at the situation, the case might drag on for a year. In any case, as long as they didn't lose, it was fine. At this time, it was the Ming family's turn to speak. The face of the famous Jiangnan litigation master, Chen Wuchang, was a bit pale. It looked like he had expended a lot of energy these days. He took a hot towel from the hands of a student beside him and wiped his face vigorously. Pulling himself together, he walked into the hall and said seriously, "The ancient sages have spoken of the so-called 5 human relations. Father and son are related, ruler and minister are righteous, husband and wife are different, elders and children are orderly, and friends are trustworthy. Sir, since Sir Xia has been determined to be the 7th young master of the Ming family, the relationship between father and son is not different from the eldest branch of the Ming family." Before he finished speaking, Song Shuren had already cut him off in a strange tone. "Not Sir Xia, Sir Ming. Don't say anything wrong. Otherwise, after the case is over, Ming Qingqing, the 7th Ming master, can continue to sue you." Song Shuren's expression was also not very good. His eyes were sunken. This time, he had come to Jiangnan alone and hadn't had time to bring any servants or students. Although he had the help of the Overwatch Council scribes, it was not easy to find evidence in piles of old papers and find scriptures beneficial to one side. Furthermore, the other party was a local litigation master with countless people helping him from behind. After fighting for 4 days, even the best litigation master in the world could not keep his spirit up. Hearing Song Shuren's words, Chen Wuchang was not anxious. He smiled merrily and bowed in apology to Xia Qifei. He then continued, "However, the words elders and children are orderly have to be careful. Since Ming Qingda is the legitimate son of the eldest branch, of course, he has the right to dispose of the Ming family property." He continued to speak in a loud voice. "There is a saying in the 4 rules of mourning: the sky cannot have 2 suns, the earth cannot have 2 masters, the country cannot have 2 monarchs, and the family cannot have 2 nobles." The more Chen Wuchang spoke, the more impassioned his voice became. This has been the case since ancient times. How can it be changed? The Qing law has long been set. Xia, why must Sir Ming continue to be entangled in this? Sir, please settle the case as soon as possible. Song Shuren stood up with some difficulty and smiled under Xia Qifei's concerned gaze. He walked to the front of the hall and proudly said, "The so-called family property is just inheriting the title and dividing the property. What Sir Chen said earlier, I do not have any different meaning. However, inheriting the title is one thing, dividing the property is another. The old Ming master once had a title, and it has now been inherited by Ming Qingda. Sir Ming Qingqing does not doubt this. However, inheriting the title is only in terms of the number of legitimate sons and concubines. Dividing the property is another matter." Chen Wuchang said slightly angrily, "Inheriting the title is the guarantee of dividing the property. Since the title is clear, the right to divide the property is naturally ready to come out. Inheriting the title and dividing the property were the two most important parts of inheritance. Song Shuren smiled coldly and said, "But dividing the property is the foundation of inheriting the title. Earlier you spoke of the Qing law, now I will speak of the Qing law." He slapped the golden fan in his hand and said in a loud voice, "The 34th rule of the Qing law, household management is controlled by the elders, and family property is public property. My master has no opinion on household management, but this family property is public property. Of course, it has to be carefully divided. As for how to divide it, since the old Ming master's will is here, of course, it has to be done according to the previous master." Chen Wuchang was angry. How could there be such a stiff argument to separate inheriting the title and dividing the property? The Qing law also says, if one lives with an elder and does not divide the family property evenly, the crime will be judged as a lowly child using the family property for personal gain. 20 strokes of the cane. Song Shuren looked coldly at Ming Launcher and said each word clearly and clearly, "My master was exiled from the family when he was young. Does this count as purposely dividing the family property? If 20 strokes of the cane, would the Ming family only have 200,000 strings of coins? I want to see just how many butts the Ming family has to be spanked." Ming Launcher stood up angrily. Song Shuren changed his direction and smiled slightly at the Zhizhou in the hall. He then said, "This is the Qing law. The Ministry of Justice, the lowly child using the family property for personal gain. Back then, you also studied law, so you should know that what I say is not wrong." Not waiting for the Ming family to respond, Song Shuren once again proudly said, "Speaking of laws, I still have one more. In the Qing law, it is clearly stated in the marriage of a righteous household that living together should be divided. Those who do not divide equally will be judged as having stolen goods reduced by 3 levels. What kind of crime is this? This is the crime of a thief." Chen Wuchang narrowed his eyes. He had great admiration for this litigation master from Jingdou. It was clearly a simple family property lawsuit, yet he had forcefully divided it into 2 areas: inheritance and division of property. Then he had jumped around like a monkey in these cracks, pressing forward step by step. Although he held the Qing law and firmly stood his ground, he had not expected that the other party would remember so clearly even the small provisions of the law from many years ago. The Qing laws that Song Shuren had just mentioned were all things that the court had forgotten to change when they were revising the law. They had probably long disappeared into some dark place in the library that even a rat would not bother to rummage through. Yet, they had been found so carefully by the other party and used so openly in court. This litigation master was indeed powerful. Song Shuren's expression was calm, but his eyes gradually became bloodshot. To be able to fight the lawsuit to this extent was already the limit of his abilities. Inheritance and division of property, if it was truly twisted, was indeed complicated. A bit of confidence gradually grew in his heart. Even if that will was still invalid in the end, he could at least try to create the effect of dividing the family property equally. 1/7 of the Ming family was not a small number. Although he could not understand Fan Xian's ambitions, since the imperial envoy thought so highly of him, he had to fight this lawsuit beautifully and write the most beautiful and glorious stroke for the profession of litigation master. To be able to participate in a battle at such a level as the Ming family property was already of the highest level for a litigation master. For larger matters, such as the inheritance in the palace, what right did a mere litigation master have to speak? Furthermore, if the court had not split into 2 sides and occasionally formed a power struggle, the Ming family property lawsuit would not have been able to go to court, much less be filed. Song Shuren would not have had the opportunity to participate. Thus, although he was very tired, he had a kind of morbid excitement. This kind of opportunity was too rare. He had to grasp it. If Song Shuren knew that the lawsuit he fought in Jiangnan would stimulate certain people's sensitive nerves and thus indirectly bring about certain people's cooperation and bring the conflict between Fan Xian and those people to a state of confrontation earlier, even if he was given a few more stimuli to leave his name in history, he would only be so scared that he would quickly hide his identity and slip away. Song Shuren did not care about that problem. The so-called family property was something everyone wanted to fight over, regardless of whether it was the Ming families or the emperors. Haven't eaten lunch yet. I'm starving to death. Going out to eat. Maybe there are some typos, please forgive me. In the end, I still sincerely call for everyone to cast a monthly vote. Thank you very much for every vote everyone has cast. Since I've started to pull for a monthly vote, I will continue to pull. Witness? To be continued. If you want to know what happens next, please log on to www.cmfu.com. More chapters. Support the author. Support original reading. Chapter 377. Just like what Fan Xian often said, no matter what happened, life had to go on. Thus, when time had already entered the 4th month of the 6th year of the Qing calendar, the Jiangnan area had not changed much compared to previous years. The sensational Ming family property lawsuit was still continuing. After the palace treasury bidding, the various royal merchants began to receive goods and sell their goods. The officials were still surreptitiously collecting silver, and the people of Suzhou were still salivating about national affairs, family affairs, and sexual affairs. There were some small changes. First of all, the Ming family property lawsuit had been going on for too long. Both sides had been tossing and turning for too long, so much so that it gradually lost the initial feeling of novelty and excitement. Each day, there were fewer and fewer professional spectators waiting outside the Suzhou Yamen. The Suzhou Zhizhou and the litigation masters from both sides were almost unable to withstand this marathon-like torment. From opening every day to opening every 3 days, it had already been 6 days without opening. Song Shuren and Chen Wuchang were still, with the help of their respective powers, digging their heads into piles of old papers and moldy Qing laws to find evidence against their side. The Ming family and Xia Qifei's focus had already shifted away from the case. The Ming family knew they couldn't let the imperial envoy drag their spirits on the family property lawsuit. They forcefully pulled themselves together and began to take care of the palace treasury business that was sure to lose money this year. They only hoped to lose less. Xia Qifei also had to start learning how to do business. With a shake of his body, he had become the largest royal merchant in Jiangnan other than the Ming family. In the past, most of the Cui family's routes to the north had been taken over by him. He had to reopen the defense routes of each province and connect with the merchants in the north. Although Fan Xian was helping him behind the scenes, this was still a complicated task. The day before he left Suzhou, Xia Qifei used his identity as the 7th young master of the Ming family to treat the Jiangnan magnates who were still in Suzhou to a meal. That night, the nobles gathered, the carriages flowed endlessly, and the merchants coming and going were oppressively noble. They directly stole 70% of Suzhou's aura of wealth. All of this aura of wealth gathered at the place Xia Qifei was treating, the Suzhou branch of Baoyue Brothel. After a delay of a number of days, the Suzhou branch of Baoyue Brothel finally opened for business. This building had originally been bought for the Ming family's Bamboo Garden restaurant. It was the busiest place in Suzhou. Shi Chanli took the 50,000 liang of silver and went around to take care of it. The various levels of government also gave Fan Xian enough face and waved their hands to let him through. Once the renovations were finished, they should have opened for business. However, because of some problems in the middle, it had been delayed until today. The problem was that the Baoyue brothel did not have a famous girl that they could bring to the table. Everything in this world was about a brand. Although Shi Chanli had borrowed a few prostitutes from the bosses of the Jiangnan brothels, he did not have a famous girl that was famous throughout Jiangnan. The Baoyue brothel, which wanted to make a name for itself in Jiangnan, did not dare to open up like this. So, it was delayed until Sang Wen came to Jiangnan. Using her status in the Jianghu, she attracted a few Jiangnan Mingchu masters. Shi Qing'er of the main Baoyue brothel in Jingdou also spent a great deal of effort to invite a newly rising popular courtesan on Lujing River, as well as a western lake beauty that the great prince had stolen from the western lake. She sent these 2 girls to Suzhou. Paired with the Mingchu masters, Shi Chanli finally had the confidence to officially open for business. That night, Xia Qifei invited a group of Jiangnan's wealthy to a banquet on the 2nd floor. Red lanterns hung high and soft music played. It was perfect for the opening of the Baoyue brothel. On the first day of the Baoyue brothel's Suzhou branch opening, they did not take in a large number of guests. They only attracted all of the wealthiest people in Jiangnan. Once this momentum came out, wouldn't those self-proclaimed romantic young masters and the sons of officials all pounce over in a few days like dogs with their tongues out? The newly rising popular courtesan on Lujing River in Jingdou was named Liang Diandian. She was not more than 16 years old and had an innate romantic air. Between her still childish brows floated a soul-stealing charm. Yet, there was a glimmer of coldness hidden within the charm. She had just made her debut when she stole the gazes of thousands of people in Jingdou. She was praised as the girl with the most potential to sit firmly in the leading position after Yuan Meng and Si Lily, who had become a brothel legend of a generation. However, this Liang Diandian did not have much time to show off her dress in Jingdou before she was forcefully bought by the Baoyue brothel, full of unwillingness, and sent to Suzhou. She could not help but feel a bit uncomfortable in her heart. However, knowing the background of the Baoyue brothel, she could not force anything. However, after she came to Suzhou, she signed a rather novel contract with shopkeeper Sangwon, which greatly surprised this girl, who was not even 16 years old. The contract seemed to be beneficial to her. How could there be such a good brothel keeper in this world? The other beauty from Shi Lake was indeed very different from the women of the Central Plains. Her eyes were slightly sunken but did not appear out of place. On the contrary, the deep ridges deepened the attractiveness of her face. Particularly, her slightly dark skin did not appear rough. On the contrary, it had a mysterious beauty like a black pearl. Furthermore, this Shi Lake beauty's figure was very curvaceous. Her front and back curves made the tongues of the Qing kingdom, who were used to the light taste of Chinese women, dry. However, this Shi Lake beauty's background was even stranger than that of Liang Diandian's. This Shi Lake beauty's surname was Ma, and her name was Su. She was the princess of a Shi Lake tribe. The great prince had led the army on an expedition to the west and had completely defeated the Shi Lake. No one knew how many tribes he had conquered. In order to show his sincerity in surrendering, the leader of the second-largest tribe offered his precious daughter to the great prince. It was a bit like a marriage gift. Unexpectedly, the great prince was a crude person. He treated the daughter of his enemy like a female slave. Particularly after marrying the great princess of northern Qi, it was even more inconvenient for him to keep this Shi Lake beauty in his manor. Thus, the moment he heard that Fan Xian was opening a brothel in Jiangnan and lacked a leading lady, he had rushed her to Baoyue brothel and then sent her to Suzhou. Between the opening of Baoyue brothel and the opening of Jingdou, the 8th Bureau had already helped Fan Xian with a sufficient advertising campaign. Although the 8th Bureau did not have many ways to deal with the Ming family in Jiangnan, it was a simple matter to mold these two girls into peerless beauties that could only be found in heaven and not in the mortal world. Sir Chanli played along with the guesses and rumors about these two girls in the marketplace and cleverly had the two girls choose a few days ago to sit in a carriage outside Suzhou for a walk. The walk was nothing more than a show to let the lecherous men of Jiangnan see the peerless beauty of these two girls from a distance. Along the way, there were countless lechers following Baoyue brothel's carriage. The green plains in front and behind the carriage had been completely flattened by the men's feet or horse hooves. The so-called walk was really flattening the green grass. Thus, everyone in Jiangnan knew what kind of two girls Baoyue brothel currently had. Their appetites were finally whetted. Today, the Baoyue brothel branch was opening, but these two leading ladies did not go out to see the guests. Even people of such status as the masters of the Chuanzhou Sun family and Lingnan Xiong family did not have the right to have them go out and sit with them for a while. Because these two girls were very obediently and quietly sitting in a room, sitting next to a young man, gently raising their wrists and raising their cups, feeding the young man food and wine. In front of this young man, no matter how much resentment these two girls had in their hearts, they did not dare show it. They did not even dare to casually demonstrate their best skill at bewitching men's hearts. In this world, they relied on nothing more than their own appearance and meticulous and kind thoughts. The young man sitting peacefully between the two of them had a delicate and handsome appearance. As for his thoughts, everyone knew that Sir Fan Jr. had a crystal heart. There was nothing in this world that he did not know, and there was no person that he could not see through. Fan Xian shook his head and indicated for the two girls beside him to stop waiting on him. If it was said that with two beautiful and gradually rising girls in Jiangnan surrounding him, it would be a lie for a normal man like him to not have any thoughts in his heart and not want to drink the soup on the other end. However, his thoughts were indeed not in these areas. He looked at Liang Diandian and sighed, thinking, how could this 16-year-old girl be so seductive? Her watery eyes seemed to speak. Thinking of this, he couldn't help but think of the question that had troubled him for a long time. Just how old was Duo? Looking at Liang Diandian's affectionate eyes, Fan Xian knew that this girl was only professionally trying to climb to a backer. However, when he turned his head and saw the Western Hu beauty, Fan Xian's heart cried out bitterly. Ma Suo was originally a Western Hu princess, but now she was in a ditch. This Ma Suo had probably long accepted her fate. In this world, women were nothing more than goods in the hands of men to be sold at will. Now that she had been sent to Jiangnan by the great prince, Baoyue brothel did not seem very scary. Shopkeepers Sang and Master Shi were also not fierce. This Sir Fan in front of him was also very beautiful. It seemed that he was much happier than staying in the manor and doing hard labor, being watched coldly by the great Wang Fei, and not knowing when he would lose his life. Fan Xian looked at Sang Wen sitting across from him and sighed sorrowfully. What is this? Isn't the great prince bullying people? Sang Wen was startled. Opening his somewhat large mouth, he laughed and said, Miss Suo is indeed very beautiful. It is just that Darren has rarely seen Hu people, so for a moment you are not used to it. His First Highness is not deliberately deceiving Darren. Fan Xian snorted. In his previous life, he had seen countless Western beauties and had once been a loyal fan of Ajiani. Of course, he could see the attractiveness of this Western Hu beauty. However, the great prince was not afraid of heaven or earth. Now, he was so scared that he had sent this girl to Suzhou. It was clear that after the great princess of Northern Qi married to Southern Qi for many months, she had finally successfully transformed into that lioness from the east of the river. The great prince had sent Ma Suo to Suzhou because he wanted to protect her life. Since it was so, it meant that even if the great prince had no affection for this Western Hu beauty, he still felt a glimmer of pity. Under these circumstances, would Fan Xian really have Ma Suo go receive guests? He would probably have to raise her carefully. What if one day the great prince suddenly became interested and came back to him in his dreams to play the horns and reminisce about beauties in his drunken stupor? What would he do then? Are you really not letting them go out to receive guests? Shi Chanli walked in from outside. He had probably drunk some wine with the merchants. His face was slightly red, and his words reeked of alcohol. He stared blankly at Fan Xian. Fan Xian furrowed his brows and thought for a while. He turned his head and glanced at Liang Diandian's thoughtful expression. He knew that if he really kept Somama, Liang Diandian would need to be comforted. After a moment of composure, he said, Right now, we are just making a name for ourselves. There is no rush to have them go out to receive guests. He smiled slightly and said, However, find some time occasionally for you two to go out and play a song or dance a little. Liang Diandian was slightly startled. She and Somama bowed and agreed at the same time. Somama's official words were still not very nimble, but her eyes already showed her gratitude toward Fan Xian. Fan Xian continued to smile and said, A wife is not as good as a concubine is not as good as stealing is not as good as not being able to steal, and not being able to steal is not as good as having one's heart itch every day but still not being able to touch. Let the men of Jiangnan endure for a few days and learn the principle of only watching from afar and not getting close. In the end, he said to Sang Wen and Shi Chanli, Men are all lowly animals. If you can understand this, this business will be easier to do. Hearing these words, Shi Chanli was slightly embarrassed and felt a bit unsatisfied. However, Sang Wen covered her mouth and laughed. Take the two of them out to meet Xiong Bailing and those old fellows. With these merchants bragging about them, their reputation will be even better. Fan Xian closed his eyes and waved his hand. Liang Diandian held Somama's hand and rose to bow to Fan Xian. She then left with Sang Wen's lead. Fan Xian had Shichanli come closer and lowered his voice. Somama, watch over her. While you're at it, spread the news and let everyone know that she is the great princess woman. Shichanli replied in shock. What if it gets back to Jingdo? I want people to know that my relationship with the great prince is not bad. Fan Xian licked his dry lips and took a sip of light wine. He smiled and said, at this time, everyone is still showing their cards. More importantly, this is their family matter. Why should I wipe their butts? He huffed through his nose and said, I traveled south with the great princess. Of course, I know that she is not a kind person. The great prince appears straightforward, but he also knows that in this world, probably only I, the great princess, will give him some face. Since he wants me to exert myself, of course, I have to pay a price. Fan Xian was purely unhappy. He thought to himself, I'm working my ass off in Jiangnan while you brothers and princes are busy with family matters in the capital. It made him feel very unfair. The Suzhou branch of the Baoyue brothel was not just used to launder money or make money. It was purely Fan Xian's own business. It shouldered the important responsibility of becoming Fan Xian's second intelligence system. In the depths of Fan Xian's heart, he still did not fully trust the Overwatch Council. Whether or not he could have the Overwatch Council was still a matter of one word from the Emperor in the current situation. Thus, during the renovation, the brass pipes had already been laid out according to the layout of the old buildings in Jingdo. The people his father had sent to be responsible for gathering intelligence had hidden it from the corresponding officials and moved into the building before the girls. Currently, the square building was in a state of intoxication. The voices gradually grew louder, but the room Fan Xian was in was unusually quiet. He stood up and first went to the toilet behind the bed to empty the contents. He then adjusted his breathing and took off the commoner's clothing he was wearing. From the cabinet, he took out the work clothes he had not worn in a long time. He tried it on and found that it fit him well. It looked like this half-year of life in power had not quickly made his figure go out of shape. Very strangely, he sat for a while longer. After confirming that he was beginning to get used to the feeling he had not seen for half a year, Fan Xian pushed open the window of the room. His fingers dug forcefully into the wall under the pitch-black night and slid down into the darkness like a gecko. Ever since his meridians had been greatly injured by the Jinqi explosion in his body, he had begun to be more careful with the circulation of his Jinqi. When there was no need, he no longer tried to push the Jinqi out of his palm and then pull it back. This method truly consumed too much of his mind and Jinqi. His feet touched the ground. He made a few turns in the complicated corridors and found the back door of the Baoyue brothel branch. Pushing open the door, he walked out and saw the carriage that had been waiting for him in the alley. Deng Ziyu sat in the driver's seat. He wore a straw hat on his head and covered most of his face. Gao De sat in the carriage and lifted a corner of the curtain. He looked outside cautiously. Fan Xian flashed in and gently spat out one word, go. Sir, how are your injuries? Gao De was not afraid of Fan Xian's cold gaze. His highest duty was to ensure Fan Xian's safety. Before he had confirmed the information, he truly did not dare to let Fan Xian take any risks. As for Fan Xian's strange injuries, there were different theories, but most people thought he had recovered a long time ago. There were only a handful of people who truly knew the inside story. Eunuch Hong was certainly one of them. However, the Emperor had caused Fan Xian's heart to chill and maintain his silence. Although Gao De had been fooled by Fan Xian at the beginning, he had been by Fan Xian's side these few months. Of course, he could see that the commissioner's current state of Jinqi was completely different from when he had gone to Northern Qi. With the gift of Haitang's heart of Tianyi Dao, no one knew how much Fan Xian's injuries had healed other than himself, not even Haitang. He lowered his head and quietly said, I'm fine. Immediately after, he said, confirm her location? Outside the carriage, Deng Ziyu nodded. After she escaped from Jingdo, she has remained in Suzhou. The council did not think she would be so daring, nor did they think that the Jiangnan officials would secretly provide protection for her. Thus, it was not until a few days ago that we found out where she lived. A cold smile rose to the corner of Fan Xian's lips. With the Ming family covering for her, of course, the Jiangnan officials would give her some face. It looks like the Jiangnan officials still do not think much of me. Gouda was, after all, the emperor's tiger guard. Hearing these words, he furrowed his brows slightly and said, "Young master, should we notify the local authorities to arrest her? After all, criminal cases are never under the council's jurisdiction." Since Fan Xian dared to bring him here tonight, he wasn't afraid of what he would say to the palace. He shook his head and said, "If we notify the authorities, she might escape again. After all, she is the second prince and Hongqing's person. The Ministry of Justice's wanted posters are useless against her. It will not be easy to capture her openly." "We should have brought more people," Gouda furrowed his brows and said. "Since she was ordered to escape, she will certainly have aces by her side. It will not be easy to capture her alive." "Not capture her alive, just kill her." Fan Xian leaned against the back of the chair and closed his eyes to rest. "I don't need to use her to defeat the Ming family. I only need to use her to suppress the Ming family. Today is the opening of the Baoyue brothel branch. No one should have thought that we would find her and make a move. Furthermore, no one would have thought that I would personally do it." Gouda wanted to speak but stopped. He began to understand Fan Xian's thoughts, but he was unable to stop him. The purpose of Fan Xian's actions tonight was actually very simple. Since the Jiangnan road officials were faintly standing against him on the road to defeating the Ming family and dared to cover for the Ming family, then he was going to use tonight's matter to intimidate the Jiangnan road officials. For those officials, there was nothing more powerful than fresh blood and death to demonstrate the Overwatch Council's power. The carriage sank into a death-like silence. There was only the sound of the wheels grinding on the rocks below. The carriage drove to a quiet alley in Suzhou. It was still some distance away from the manor when it stopped. Fan Xian touched the dagger in his boots and gently pressed the soft sword at his waist. He had borrowed this sword from Haitang. After carefully confirming the equipment, he opened his mouth and said in a low voice, "Gouda, you are responsible for the outside. Leave no one alive. Don't let her slip away." Gouda made a sound of acknowledgement in a heavy voice. "Ziyu, have the people we sent to the governor's manor been prepared?" Fan Xian asked. Deng Ziyu nodded. "Wait for us here. Be careful." After saying this, Fan Xian flashed out of the carriage like a black loach and quickly disappeared into the darkness below the high wall. Tonight, only 3 people had come. Given Fan Xian's present identity, he should not have come alone to take such a risk. However, today's matter had to be done in secret. Furthermore, the most important reason was that Fan Xian had always had this kind of adventurous impulse in the depths of his heart. Furthermore, he had to use this action to recover his confidence in martial arts. At the same time, he wanted to test just what level he had reached with his secret practice of the sword these few days. Gouda calculated the time and estimated it was about time. He retied the hemp rope around the hilt of the long knife and walked down from the carriage. Like a god of death, he walked steadily to the back of the manor. Who knew how many aces were hidden in that manor in the dark night? Yet there were only 2 of them. Probably only Fan Xian and Gouda had this kind of confidence. Gouda stood silently under the back wall of the manor. His entire body seemed to have become one with the stone wall, gradually becoming indistinguishable. The Jinqi in his body gradually began to circulate. He could clearly hear the fine sounds inside the wall. Occasionally, there would be a light sound in the courtyard. It was like the sound of the commissioner's favorite hard-tipped goose feather quill cutting through paper. If one did not listen carefully, no one would notice this sound. Gouda knew that one person had already died to Fan Xian's hand. Another muffled sound rang out like a sesame seed cake that had just come out of the oven and suddenly deflated. Gouda's brows furrowed slightly. Had the commissioner used his palm to split open someone's head? Fan Xian was like a ghost in the night, walking steadily and silently through the courtyard. Behind him were a few bodies. The wounds on the bodies were not obvious, and there was not much blood flowing, but they were completely dead. The doors of the rooms beside him were wide open. The people sleeping soundly inside had not yet risen before they had been killed on their beds. The servants and serving girls in one of the rooms had also collapsed weakly on the bed. There were no wounds on their bodies. It looked like they had just been drugged. Until now, no one in the courtyard had discovered that a killer had already come close to them. Just as Chen Pingping had once taught him, no one could forever block a great grandmaster assassin. For an assassin like Fan Xian, whose power had reached the 9th level and who had studied dark techniques since childhood, there were not many places in the world that could block him. As Fan Xian walked silently toward the back of the courtyard, he used a vigilant gaze to watch the tall walls on both sides. The Overwatch Council's intelligence reports were detailed enough. They had clearly investigated the defenses of this courtyard, so no one hiding in the dark could escape his cold, eagle-like eyes. He walked past a tree. A person flashed behind the tree. Holding a knife, he struck out noiselessly. Fan Xian's eyes looked forward. His expression did not change. His right hand was already on his waist. With a swish, he pulled out the soft sword. With a flick of his wrist, his left foot took a step back and the heel of his right foot turned slightly. His entire body tilted to the left at an ingenious angle. The sword in his hand followed along his forearm. Like an arrow leaving a bow, it stabbed out strangely. This sword seemed to contain a strange aura. It formed a perfect harmony with Fan Xian's entire body. The tip of the sword casually and cleanly pierced into the cartilage of the attacker's throat. With a crack, the attacker's throat shattered noiselessly. He spat out a mouthful of blood and fell. Fan Xian pulled back his sword. Even at this moment, he still did not look in front of him or behind him. The door to the side room on the stone steps opened. A person discovered Fan Xian's existence and rushed down with a panicked and angry shout. Fan Xian raised his arms and held the sword horizontally in front of his chest. It was strange, as if he was committing suicide. However, he blocked all the openings in front of him. In the next moment, his feet rushed 3 steps forward. The sword horizontally, which seemed to be an impenetrable defense, instantly became a sudden attack filled with ruthlessness. When this strike passed, Fan Xian's entire mind seemed to be in front of him. His spirit and spirit were all in this strike. With such power, how could anyone block it? Fresh blood sprayed out, and a head fell to the ground. Fan Xian's expression remained calm. He took 2 light steps to the right. Zhenqi rose swiftly from the snowy mountain and burst forth from his shoulder blade. Like a spring, he flicked his right arm out. It was like a hard willow branch in spring outside Suzhou being pulled down by a naughty child and then swiftly flicked back. With such a poetic and picturesque flick, the sword in his right hand was like the last ink dot of a master painter, gently sprinkling down. It just so happened to land on another person's throat. Another person was killed. Fan Xian had used 3 strikes and killed 3 people. What kind of swordplay was this? If Gauda was in the courtyard at this moment, he would certainly cry out in surprise. If Haitang saw this scene, she would certainly know why Fan Xian had been hiding from her these days when he was practicing martial arts. If Yun Zhilan, who was playing with the shadow in Jiangnan, saw these 3 strikes, he would certainly be dumbfounded on the spot, wondering when his teacher had taken in such a young disciple. Sigu sword. Sigu sword, Sigu sword. The Sigu sword that focused on the front and ignored the back, looked left and ignored the right. After stabbing all the hatchet men who had woken up in the courtyard to death, Fan Xian lightly shook the edge of his sword with satisfaction. He was very satisfied with the results of tonight's training. The shadow assassin had stabbed him once and almost killed him. The compensation he had asked for from the other party in the end seemed to be enough to make up for the damage. Not everyone in this world was as lucky as Fan Xian to be able to learn the true essence of the Sigu sword. The key to the Sigu sword was not the power of the sword, much less the sword moves. It was footwork. Only footwork could completely concentrate a person's strength into a metal sword. Fan Xian faintly felt that the footwork was not even the most important part. The key was the kind of ruthlessness that focused on the front and ignored the back, looked left and ignored the right. Each strike had to be done with full strength. Murderous intent swept forward. The gods could not stop it, and the heavens could not hinder it. The so-called looking around was actually not caring. Thinking of this, Fan Xian silently shook his head. He thought of the white-clothed shadows strike in the hanging temple that seemed to be able to cover up the light of the sun. If he had not been the one facing this strike at the time, perhaps the shadow would have mercilessly killed him under the sword. A cold sword illuminated the courtyard. Everyone who could die died under this sword. Only 2 people escaped through the back wall. Fan Xian did not pay them any attention. He just carried the long sword on his back and quietly walked toward the quiet bedroom. Outside the back wall, there were 2 swishing sounds. Gauda pulled back his long knife and looked at the 4 pieces of flesh beside him. He shook his head. The bedroom door was pushed open by Fan Xian. He looked at the woman who had just woken up from the bed and only had time to light the red candle. She didn't have time to put on her clothes. He smiled slightly and said, "Master Yun, long time no see." Yuan Meng, who was wanted by the Ministry of Justice all over the world and hiding in Suzhou, bit her lower lip tightly and looked at the godlike handsome young man at the door. A moment later, she suddenly cried out in a hoarse voice, "Sir Fan Jr., why won't you let me go?" What a childish question, but I'm willing to answer it. Fan Xian slowly walked toward her and calmly said, "Your hands are stained with the blood of too many innocent women. Father has ordered that as a child, I must be filial." A few strands of Yuan Meng's black hair floated weakly on her forehead. She smiled bitterly. "I was only following orders regarding the matter in the capital. As for the matter of the Ministry of Justice ordering me to be arrested, you should know that your brother and the 3rd prince you are currently teaching aren't clean either. If you want to kill me, then kill me. But don't try to use such righteous words to disgust me." Fan Xian raised his sword and smiled slightly. "Accept your fate. You are a bad person. If I was a good person, perhaps you would have a chance. Unfortunately, you also understand that I am also a bad person." Yuan Meng bit her lower lip nervously, shrouded in fear. Suddenly, she let out a shrill laugh and said, "Ha! You want to capture me to deal with His Highness? Let me tell you, it's impossible." After saying this, she gritted her teeth and committed suicide by taking poison. Her entire body suddenly froze. She fell onto the red quilt in the middle of the bed with a thud. Fan Xian shook his head, thinking that he had only wanted to kill her. With a wave of his arm, the tip of the sword pierced into the girl's throat. Continuing to pull in monthly votes. To be continued. If you want to know what happened after, please log on to www.cmfu.com. More chapters. Support the author. Support original reading. Chapter 378. An inauspicious bird cry rang out in the dark night. The clouds parted and the moon rose. Occasionally, a black shadow swept out from the treetops. Up the mountain. Fan Xian and Gauda returned to the carriage. Fan Xian said to Deng Ziyu, "Be quiet." Deng Ziyu nodded and gently waved the reins. The horse with its teeth pulled the carriage. It went around the deathly silent courtyard and headed toward the back of the city. Behind the courtyard was a hill hidden in the darkness. There were also spring trees. Looking down from there, no one should be able to discover their group. In the carriage, Fan Xian silently took off the gloves on his hands. The gloves were as thin as a layer of skin. He carefully wiped the blood on the soft sword with his glove and confirmed that there was no longer a trace of blood on the sword. Only then did he put the soft sword back to his waist. Then he steadily flicked his index finger. Some powder fell on the glove, and with a boom, it burst into flames. Gauda glanced at him and took out a metal bucket from under the chair and placed it in front of him. Fan Xian threw the burning gloves into the metal bucket and narrowed his eyes at the gradually dwindling flame. The flames in his eyes also gradually extinguished. Before long, the carriage had already reached the top of the hill. The courtyard below was still silent. The people inside were either dead or unconscious, so they could not make any noise. No one knew that a murder had occurred inside, so no one would come to see. No one knew what Fan Xian was preparing to see by staying on the mountain behind. Deng Ziyu gently patted the back of the horse's neck. He entered the carriage and sat down silently. Fan Xian lifted a corner of the curtain and looked down. He didn't know how long he had looked, but there was still no change. It will probably be a long time before they discover what happened here. Deng Ziyu looked at the time. It should be the middle of the night. He urged Fan Xian, "They won't come so early." Fan Xian smiled. He knew he was indeed a bit impatient. He quietly said something to Gouda and then leaned against the back of the chair and closed his eyes to rest. Gouda lifted up a blanket and covered his body. Gradually, his slightly cold body warmed. Fan Xian felt drowsiness in the warmth. Just like this, he fell into a deep sleep. After sleeping for an indeterminable amount of time, Fan Xian opened his eyes and made a sound of acknowledgement. Deng Ziyu lifted the curtain and glanced down. Lowering his voice, he said, "They're here." Fan Xian lifted the blanket and put his head by the window. He narrowed his eyes and looked down. Outside the house that Yuan Meng had been living in seclusion all this time, a person suddenly appeared. That person knocked on the door with familiarity. The rhythm of the knocking clearly hid some kind of secret signal. It seemed that he was the contact person of the Jiangnan forces responsible for contacting Yuan Meng. The man was wearing a thin cotton coat and had an ordinary appearance. He knocked on the door of the house for a long time and found that no one answered him. He seemed a little surprised and nervous and immediately retreated into the darkness. Fan Xian, who was watching from the top of the mountain, was not anxious. He knew that this person would definitely return. Sure enough, that person didn't go far. After a short while, a person's head sneakily poked out from the northwest wall. It was that person who was spying on what was happening in the courtyard. The man gathered his courage and jumped into the courtyard. The three people on the mountain could no longer see what that person saw in the courtyard. They could only hear an extremely suppressed soft cry. That person must have finally discovered the large number of corpses in the courtyard and the tragic scene of a pool of blood. The courtyard door was immediately pushed open. That person lowered his head and rushed into the darkness, presumably to report to his master. Fan Xian stretched lazily in the carriage and yawned. Only now did he notice that the sky was gradually turning white. He couldn't resist smiling and saying, "It's almost daybreak. If the other party wants to hide this matter, they have to hurry." Deng Ziyu nodded. "Each manor has sent people to keep watch. Whoever receives this news tonight will have intelligence reports tomorrow." Fan Xian smiled and said, "Guess, who exactly are the people who are coming to take care of Yuan Meng's funeral today?" Deng Ziyu forced a smile and said, "The Suzhou government will certainly send people. Sir, I'll keep watch here. You should go back to the manor and rest first." Fan Xian smiled and didn't say anything more. Yuan Meng's death shocked the Jiangnan officials who were secretly protecting her. Killing in the night and spying in the morning, anyone who could learn of Yuan Meng's death in such a short time and rush to take care of the funeral was, of course, the official who played a dishonorable role in this matter. More accurately, who exactly were the eldest princess trusted aides in Jiangnan Road? They should be able to find out a bit this morning. Fan Xian had no other choice. The Overwatch Council did not have enough people in Jiangnan. It was impossible to place a fatal spy in every manor. They could only use the method of separating and monitoring and the method of killing Yuan Jingmeng to investigate. Recently, the Suzhou Zhizhou had been busy listening to Song Shuren and Qin Wuchang's debate in court every day. Not only had he neglected government affairs, but his state of mind had also been greatly exhausted. Every night, he fell into a deep sleep. Even his most beloved third concubine rarely went to be intimate with her. Thus, when he was called out of his bed early this morning, he was very angry. After he heard the news, it was like a basin of cold water had been poured over him from head to toe. All of his anger disappeared without a trace in an instant. Incomparable shock and deep worry surged into his mind. Yuan Meng was dead? This matter had happened too suddenly. How could he explain it to the second prince, the heir, and the eldest princess? As he hurriedly put on his clothes, he ordered someone to summon the advisor of the manor. By the time the advisor arrived, the Zhizhou had already put on his clothes. With a glimmer of complaint, he said, "Why did you come so slowly? Yuan Meng is dead." The advisors were all trusted aides of these old officials. There was nothing they would hide from each other. Of course, this advisor also knew about Yuan Meng's matter. He smiled bitterly and said, "If she's dead, then she's dead. Since the imperial envoy has come to Suzhou, and that Yuan Meng is still not willing to leave, in the end, only death awaits her." The Zhizhou furrowed his brows and said, "She hid it so well, You mean, it was the Overwatch Council who did it? Other than the Overwatch Council, what other power in Jiangnan could silently kill Yuan Meng? The advisor analyzed. Sir, you must not panic at this time. In any case, Yuan Meng is already dead, so it is impossible for the Overwatch Council to discover our connection to her. If you react inappropriately now, it will instead allow the Overwatch Council to discover your connection to this matter. The advisor's considerations were indeed sufficiently cautious. The Jizhou thought for a bit and furrowed his brows. I still feel it is strange. If it was the imperial envoy who did it, why didn't he capture Yuan Meng and instead directly kill her? If the imperial envoy wanted to use the matter of the Ministry of Justice's wanted notice to move against me, then he shouldn't have handled it this way. The advisor also didn't understand this point and guessed. Yuan Meng was someone close to the second prince and the heir. Although the Ministry of Justice had issued a wanted notice, no official under heaven would dare to risk offending the nobles in the capital to capture her. Sir, you don't have to worry too much. Everyone is like this. As for why the Overwatch Council didn't capture her alive, I think perhaps Yuan Meng knew she wouldn't be able to survive the Overwatch Council's punishment, so she committed suicide. We still have to go and see. The Jizhou made up his mind. At least we have to know some details. The advisor resolutely and decisively dissuaded, Sir, you cannot go. The Jizhou furrowed his brows. Naturally, I won't go in full glory. It's almost daybreak. If I don't quickly tidy up and word gets out, the Ministry of Justice in Jingdo will certainly have something to say. The Overwatch Council will also use this as a pretext to make a fuss. How will the Suzhou government answer the emperor's questions? If the Overwatch Council wanted to use this as a pretext to make a fuss, they wouldn't have made this a dead question today, the advisor reminded. Who knows how many pairs of eyes are watching over there right now? Sir, you definitely cannot go. As for dealing with the aftermath, I'll disguise myself in a bit and bring some trusted aides over. The Jizhou thought that this would indeed be much safer, so he agreed to this suggestion. This official and advisor thought their reaction could be considered cautious. They had not expected that when the advisor dressed as a morning attendant and slipped out from the back of the manor, a secret agent hidden in the alley outside the Jizhou Yamen had long seen this scene clearly. By the time the Suzhou government advisor sat in the little green-curtained sedan chair and came to the outskirts of the courtyard Yuan Meng was hiding in, he found that there were already strange people on the streets. His heart tightened. He lifted the curtain of the sedan chair and relaxed. He furrowed his brows at the cloth-clad man who had hurried to the side of the sedan chair and said, What exactly happened? How did she just die like this? The cloth-clad man was the Suzhou Thousand Man. He was also one of the officials who had been woken from his bed by the news of Yuan Meng's death. He should have been stationed outside the city, but his manor was inside the city, so he was the first person to arrive. Hearing the advisor's question, the Thousand Man said without good humor, You're asking me, but who am I supposed to ask? The advisor paused and got off the sedan chair. The two of them looked at each other's clothing and couldn't help but sigh and smile bitterly. They were official advisors, yet they were forced to wear the clothes of commoners. Is the street clean? The advisor turned his face slightly to the side, covering his face as he asked carefully. The Thousand Man replied, Don't worry, my subordinates have already cleaned it up. There shouldn't be anyone watching from the side. The advisor nodded and walked shoulder to shoulder with the Thousand Man into the courtyard. Entering the courtyard and looking at the corpses all over the ground and the tragic sight, the advisor couldn't help but feel nauseous. He covered his mouth and nose and said, Where is Yuan Meng's body? In the room? The advisor forcefully suppressed his nausea and fear and walked into the room to take a look. He saw Yuan Meng's death with her eyes wide open. Going forward to confirm that she was completely dead, the advisor relaxed a little and sighed. I really don't know how to explain this to the capital. Let's clean it up first, the Thousand Man said hatefully. It's almost daybreak. If someone sees this, it will probably immediately spread throughout Suzhou. What will we do then? No one from the Ming family came? That group of unscrupulous merchants, they're afraid the imperial envoy is watching in the dark, so they won't show themselves. The two of them walked out of the courtyard door and were greeted by a few people who had come later. A number of people gathered together and spoke with heavy expressions. They felt that this matter should have been done by the Overwatch Council, but it also shouldn't have been done by the Overwatch Council. After discussing this and that, they came to a conclusion. They didn't know how to handle it. The wounds on the body have all been torn apart. Although it can be seen that it was a sword, it is difficult to see the style of the sword. We only know that there was only one person who did it. Of course, it was an ace. A person who looked like he was skilled in torture said in a low voice, "If it was the Overwatch Council who killed, why would they need to hide it?" In the end, it was the advisor representing the Suzhou Jizhou who made the decision and coldly said, "It's better if this case is not solved. All of us need to retreat and have our subordinates clean this place up. If the Overwatch Council doesn't care, then we'll bury this matter. If the Overwatch Council really has spies following, in any case, don't drag us down. When the time comes and they ask, just say we received a report and came to look at the case." The Qian director made a pay sound and scolded, "I am a general, how can I come to look at the case?" The advisor rolled his eyes at him and said, "Who told you to rush over in such a hurry?" There was nothing to argue about. A number of people began to split up. Those responsible for cleaning up cleaned up, those responsible for burying people buried people, and those responsible for going back to the manor to do paperwork. As for whether or not this matter would be reported, it would depend on what the news from the Imperial Envoy's side was like. As these people were busy, they did not notice that on a distant hill, there was a completely black carriage slowly driving away like a ghost. The people had been killed by Fan Xian, yet these Jiangnan road officials had to bury them. However, he certainly did not have any thoughts of taking advantage of them. As for the sword wounds on the bodies in the courtyard, they had all been treated a second time because he didn't want Sigu Jian's wounds to get out. Since it was impossible to frame Dongyi, then there was no need to take this risk. Thus, he didn't even let Gao De see his actions. Most importantly, he couldn't let the emperor in the palace know that he knew Sigu Jian. Otherwise, the emperor would certainly think of the assassin in the Hanging Temple, Sigu Jian's brother, and the Overwatch Council. That would bring a terrifying result. The carriage moved slowly. Fan Xian smiled coldly in the carriage and said, "Yuan Meng died, and the Jiangnan road officials are already so shocked. Are these officials all dogs raised by the eldest princess?" Deng Ziyu glanced at Gao De and guessed that the commissioner wanted to borrow Gao De's ears to complain to the emperor in the palace. He smiled and replied, "The eldest princess has been in Jiangnan for a long time. She will always have some trusted aides. Did you see all the people who came today clearly? Some of their faces are unfamiliar, but since these people all came from the manor, presumably, the spies below have seen them clearly. In a bit, there will be definite news." Deng Ziyu sighed. However, the Ming family is quite straightforward. They know they can't touch this matter, so they won't come. Fan Xian also felt it was a bit of a pity. He had thought that even if he couldn't use Yuan Meng's matter to dig out a large piece of the Ming family, he could at least make them feel a bit more uncomfortable. The carriage quietly traveled to Hua Garden. Fan Xian felt a bit sleepy and waved his hand for the two of them to go rest while he returned to the back residence. Cici had been lying on the table waiting for his return. Seeing him enter the room, she quickly poured hot water for him to warm his feet. She knew that the young master didn't want too many people to know about what happened tonight, so it wasn't convenient for her to order the servants and serving girls to make hot food. She personally brought over the bird's nest that had been warmed in the water and helped him eat it. Fan Xian drank all the paste in the bowl in one gulp with satisfaction. After warming his feet, he fell onto the bed and fell into a deep sleep. He didn't wake up until the afternoon. He didn't know what kind of changes would occur in Suzhou because of Yuan Meng's death, but he didn't care too much. Knowing that he had woken up, Deng Ziyu walked in somewhat haggard after Cici's announcement and handed him the case file in his hands. Fan Xian took it and glanced through it. Written on it were all the yamens that had acted strangely in Suzhou this morning. He couldn't resist narrowing his eyes and sighing. F***CK, this city full of officials, they are all enemies. Are they going to let people live their days? Once Yuan Meng died, they were able to keep their composure. Deng Ziyu forced a smile and said, "The officials are caught in the middle. Their days are not going to be easy. Fan Xian shook his head and smiled coldly. Since we already have the name list, their days in the future will be even harder. Send the name list back to Jingdo and have the second bureau begin to investigate the old records. If we want to move against someone, we have to dig out his past. Even if he took a dozen liang of silver a dozen years ago, we still have to dig it out. Deng Ziyu knew that as Fan Xian made up his mind to move against the Ming family, he would also move against these officials along the way. He didn't dare to breathe too loudly and agreed in a low voice. When Fan Xian read to the end, the anger in his eyes gradually rose. Hatefully, he threw the file onto the table and cursed in a low voice. As expected, Xue Qing also knows of this matter. This Sir Sure is jubilant on the wall. For Fan Xian, killing Yuan Jingmeng today would not shock him with any information that the Jiangnan officialdom would reveal because of this. The eldest princess and the Ming family had operated in Jiangnan for a long time. This area of officialdom was filled with their people. Given the power and position in Fan Xian's hands, he was not worried in the face of this kind of resistance. What he wanted to see clearly was how the Jiangnan governor, Xue Qing, was prepared to stand in this matter. Xue Qing was a border official. Even if Fan Xian had the identity of an imperial envoy, he couldn't do anything to him. Furthermore, the governor was also in charge of civil and military affairs. The power he could control was too great. If even he stood against Fan Xian, the resistance to Fan Xian taking in the Ming family would become abnormally strong. Deng Ziyu saw his slightly angry expression and carefully comforted. The governor's manor has received the news, but it has not made a sound, nor has there been any reaction. For after all, he is a governor. If the officials below him have connections in the capital and Yuan Jingmeng is hiding in Jiangnan, this matter cannot be hidden from him. However, he doesn't want to offend you, and he certainly doesn't want to offend the princes in the capital. This matter doesn't mean anything. Governor Xue should still be neutral. Fan Xian thought for a moment and also found that his reaction seemed to have been a bit excessive. Perhaps it was the hidden nervousness under these few days of laxness that made him overly sensitive. He couldn't help smiling self-mockingly and said, "Thank you for your auspicious words, but you should still go make arrangements. The day after tomorrow, we will visit Xue Qing again." Deng Ziyu was startled and seemed to have something he wanted to say. Fan Xian glanced at him and smiled. "If you have any ideas, just say them. Why are you still acting like a woman in front of me?" Deng Ziyu smiled and said, "I don't think you should be in a rush to visit Sir Xue in the near future." "But why is that?" Fan Xian asked curiously. Deng Ziyu analyzed. "After all, the governor is still neutral. If you visit the manor, given your personality, you will probably immediately force the governor to immediately take a stand. What if the governor doesn't do as you wish? Then what should we do? In my opinion, it is best to let Governor Xue maintain the attitude of watching the show. We will continue to do what we need to do, and the Ming family will continue to press. As long as the governor does not make up his mind, there will be no one who can oppose you. Then we will have more time to do things." He continued, "You want the governor to make up his mind. In reality, the slower the governor makes up his mind, the better it is for us." Fan Xian furrowed his brows and said, "Right now, we are only making small moves against the Ming family. Xue Qing can still watch the show. If after the new year I actually make a killing move, Xue Qing can't continue to watch the show. At that time, he will have to pick a side. My heart is a bit unsteady." Deng Ziyu thought for a bit and smiled. "I think, at least wait until you go to Wuzhou before we talk." Fan Xian immediately understood his meaning. Governor Xue Qing of Jiangnan Road was the former Prime Minister Lin Ruofu's favorite student, and Lin Ruofu was De Bao and Wan Er's father, his father-in-law. Even if Xue Qing didn't have to give his father-in-law face right now, his father-in-law would certainly know Xue Qing's bottom line. That makes sense. Fan Xian immediately felt his heart relax a great deal. Laughing loudly, he said, "Stand in line and add weight. Although my father-in-law is almost rusty, his weight is not light." Deng Ziyu chuckled. Fan Xian looked at Deng Ziyu's tired expression and asked curiously, "You didn't sleep in the morning?" Deng Ziyu respectfully replied, I had to confirm this information, so I spent some time. Fan Xian had wanted to urge him to relax, but thinking of his earlier behavior, it seemed that he was in no position to convince the other party. He couldn't resist smiling. Suddenly, he thought of another matter and asked seriously, Ziyu, before you entered the Qinian unit, you were in the second bureau, right? Deng Ziyu glanced at him in astonishment and nodded. He didn't know why the commissioner would suddenly ask this question. Wang Qinian will return to the country at the end of summer. Fan Xian looked at him and smiled. Fan Xian looked at him and smiled. The council is preparing to let him take over the first bureau. Thus, Shangjing in northern Qi needs someone who can hold the fort. You've been with me for almost 2 years and have seen some things. Do you have the courage to travel north? For now, I won't ask for monthly votes in the title. I just don't think it's pretty enough. Allow me to say a few words inside. In reality, I've already put in a lot of effort in asking for monthly votes, only I don't know how to ask for them. I really want monthly votes. This is the truth. I really don't know how to ask for votes. This is also the truth. I had diarrhea today and was very miserable. Can this be considered a reason to ask for votes? If I want to add more updates, I really don't have that ability. Comfort myself and everyone. My updates excel in stability and endurance. To be continued. If you want to know what happens next, please log on to www.cmfu.com. More chapters. Support the author. Support original reading. Chapter 379. Deng Ziyu thought for a moment and understood the commissioner's words very clearly. The so-called head of Northern Qi was indeed a risky assignment. However, it was also the most important link on the Overwatch Council's external battlefront. Anyone who had held this position would be given an important position after returning home. There was no need to talk about the previous Yen Bingyun, Sir Yen Jr. At such a young age, he had already become the head of the 4th Bureau. Everyone knew that after Director Chen retired and Sir Fan Jr. took over the position of director, Sir Yen Jr. would certainly have an even more important assignment. Deng Ziyu's familiar old superior, Wang Qinian, had been in the council for 10 years. The moment he met Fan Xian, he had been sent to Northern Qi. Hearing the commissioner's earlier words, after Wang Qinian returned home, he would also become the new head of the 1st Bureau. The trip to Northern Qi was risky, but it was also political gilding. The commissioner had asked him if he was willing to go to Northern Qi because he was prepared to promote him. Furthermore, he had heard that the old head of the 2nd Bureau was getting old and preparing to retire. He had also come from the 2nd Bureau. Deng Ziyu's heart was endlessly excited. He knelt in front of Fan Xian and said in a low voice, "I will listen to your arrangements." Fan Xian smiled and didn't continue to say anything. Through the Jiangnan matter, he felt more and more that although the emperor trusted him greatly, he still absolutely prevented him from having any connection with the military. It was to the extent that when he did things, the absolute power he held in his hands was still limited. Otherwise, he would not be so afraid of the existence of the Jiangnan governor, Xue Qing. The person sitting on the throne didn't even trust his legitimate son, much less Fan Xian. Fan Xian knew that it was already good that the emperor had given him so much power. However, he also knew that the other party would not allow him to expand his power. Since it was difficult to obtain power from outside, then Fan Xian had to hold the power he already held more firmly. For example, the Overwatch Council in the post-Zhen Pingping era had to change its blood. It had to be replenished with new blood loyal to him. Deng Ziyu reported to him the Overwatch Council's recent actions in Jiangnan. The main focus was still on the Ming family. Although the Overwatch Council was in charge of supervising the governance of officials and did not have direct power over the power of the people, there was no lack of reasons from the government in this world. The Overwatch Council had already made early preparations. At any time, they could follow Fan Xian's orders and intervene in Jiangnan affairs. From the palace treasury to Suzhou to the docks, from the tents to the warehouses, they would suppress the Ming family in all aspects. This was all Fan Xian could do at the moment. Since they could not find concrete evidence of the Ming family's crimes, it was impossible to use official power to suppress them. The officials of Jiangnan Road were all watching him. Presently, The Overwatch Council's job was to further reduce the Ming family's income through harassment of the Ming family's trade routes, as well as the Palace Treasury Transport Company tampering with the supply of goods. This would cause the other party's flowing silver to sink into a shortage. Only by doing this could they force the Ming family to continue moving silver on a large scale. And the method was actually hidden in the transfer of silver. How long has it been since there was any news from the island? Fan Xian furrowed his brows. The island matter that was enough to crush the Ming family had suddenly sunk into silence. Deng Ziyu heard Fan Xian's worry and also had some misgivings in his heart. He reported, the Chuanzhou branch also feels that the matter is strange and has already sent people to the island. There will probably be news back the day after tomorrow. Jiangnan was vast. It would take too long for news to travel from the islands of the Eastern Sea to Suzhou. Fan Xian knew that he could only wait for now. After Deng Ziyu left, only then did Fan Xian feel a little tired. He stretched and walked out of the room, taking a stroll in Hua Garden. Although the Hua Garden was Yang Jimei's luxurious garden, it wasn't tainted with too much of the wealthy aura of a salt merchant or the arrogant smell of illicit salt peddlers. Instead, it was beautiful and elegant. The shallow flowing water, verdant fake mountains, layer upon layer of mountain peaks, and the pavilions that lined the corridors and the mountain pavilions were all arranged by the skillful hands of the designer back then. The entire garden seemed to have come to life, like the verdant mountains of Jiangnan, like the clear water of West Lake, gently and lightly surrounding the people in the garden. This kind of skillful arrangement of man and nature being one was, without question, what the direct descendant of Tianidao, Haiteng, most of her time in Suzhou was spent quietly thinking in the garden and did not go out to seek out the elegance of the Jiangnan people. Thus, when Fan Xian saw the flowery clothing by the little lake, he was not surprised. Such a thing as fishing does not seem to suit you. He walked to the edge of the lake and sat down. He was slightly closer to the shore than Haiteng. There was a foot of distance between the two of them. From this angle, he could just see Haiteng's steady shoulders and the flowery cloth wrapped around her head. Beside her was a normal yellow straw hat. Haiteng did not turn her head and replied evenly, "Why not?" The bamboo pole in her hand did not move at all. Only the tip of the pole nodded as if greeting the fish in the water. There was no other meaning. Fan Xian smiled and rubbed his moss-covered hands carelessly by his side. Fishing is also killing. I'll teach you a method. You don't need to put out bait. Just use your heart to fish. This was a trick he had read in the novels of his previous life. In those mysterious novels, mysterious characters liked to play the most. Unexpectedly, Haiteng still did not turn her head or move. On the contrary, she laughed mockingly and said, "What a boring thing. If you don't use bait, does that mean you don't want to fish?" Fishing in the heart. Since what you seek is temperament, if your heart is hooked, then naturally you're hooking. As for whether or not you can hook it, what difference does it make? Fan Xian was angry and bitter. He just wanted to chat. Why did she have to create such a pointless conversation? Haiteng turned her head to glance at him and smiled. "I know your heart hasn't been calm these days. Why don't we sit together? Fishing is very good at calming the heart." Fan Xian shook his head and smiled. "A gentleman stays away from the kitchen, much less a fishing net and hunting fork?" Haiteng couldn't resist rolling her eyes at him and shaking her head. "Hypocritical fellow." Fan Xian chuckled and moved forward a little. Unexpectedly, his bottom slipped and he almost slid into the lake. It made his hands and feet flustered and he began to cry out. There were rocks by the lake but no trees or grass. Other than Haiteng, there was no place for him to lean on. Very naturally, his hands grabbed onto Haiteng's shoulders. Haiteng's shoulders shook slightly and shook his hands away. She turned her hand around to hold onto his wrist and helped him stabilize his balance. Smiling slightly, she said, "Not only are you hypocritical, even your acting is so fake. How can there be a 9th-level ace in this world who can't even sit steadily?" Fan Xian raised his head to the sky and sighed. "The world doesn't know me, and Duo doesn't believe me. How can I live like this?" Haiteng flipped her wrist and had him sit beside her. Very naturally, she took out another fishing rod beside her and stuffed it into Fan Xian's hand. "Since you want to fish, you have to be patient. Don't rush. Her words carried a double meaning, but Fan Xian knew that she was not talking about the problem of picking up girls. Rather, it was the problem of dealing with the situation in Jiangnan. He smiled and took out an earthworm from the small clay jar beside him. He hung it on the hook and dropped it into the water. He then scattered some of the scraps Duo had prepared and put them into the water to lure the fish. The lakeside immediately entered a state of calm. A moment later, Fan Xian's clear and light voice broke this rare tacit understanding. I am patient and I am not in a rush. The situation in Jiangnan is not difficult to control. Furthermore, the plan has been set. I have the confidence to walk it step by step. The problem is that Jiangnan is watching Jingdou, but I cannot control what will happen in Jingdou. Things there could develop in the direction I want them to, or they could suddenly erupt into a major incident that no one can react to. Major incident. Correct. Fan Xian didn't continue. He only carried a glimmer of doubt and a glimmer of sincere admiration. You know I am the commissioner of the Overwatch Council, then you must also know who the true elders of the Overwatch Council are. Shao En of the north, Ping Ping of the south. There was a glimmer of bitterness in Haitang's smile. That Director Chen has killed countless people in the north. How could we not remember him? Fan Xian smiled and said, each has their own master, and each has their own beliefs. The two sides were once enemies. It is natural for you to kill me. I just want you to know that this old man is one of the two people in the world that I cannot see clearly. Two people? Haitang turned her head curiously. Correct, Fan Xian said with a cautious expression. With a cautious expression, Fan Xian said, even if it's my emperor or your emperor, I can guess some of their thoughts and positions. Since they sit on the dragon chair, they must think about things related to this chair. However, Qin Pingping is different. As they say, having no desires makes one strong, and having tolerance is great. When a person is about to die, his words cannot be pondered. What exactly this old man wants to do and what he is doing, I cannot see clearly. Given his present position, there is absolutely no need for him to be involved in the fight for the throne. Regardless of who becomes the prince, he must be treated well. Furthermore, he has always been so calm. It does not match his way of doing things in his life. Chen Pingping was the most famous schemer in the world. For such a person, it was fine if he did not act. Once he did, it would flip the world upside down. Haitang thought for a moment and then quietly said, if you hadn't avoided me and explained clearly the relationship between your mother and Director Chen, I would certainly have a different view of this matter. Everyone in the world would probably think that Chen Pingping's high regard for you is completely because of the Qing Emperor's edict. Correct. Through the things you've told me in the past, I seem to be able to see some unfavorable trends. Haitang smiled self-mockingly. You want to support the third prince. Would Chen Pingping want to support you? It is too difficult, Fan Xian said with a frown. There are some problems with my birth. If I don't sweep clean the nobles in the palace, I will not be able to enter the palace. Furthermore, who knows who was hiding behind the events of the past? I will figure this matter out one day. However, I can't rush it right now. As for what you said about the director's intentions, he smiled slightly and shook his head. Being an emperor is not being a commissioner. For such an important matter, if he didn't inform me, he would not dare to do it alone. Haitang sank into deep thought. A moment later, she shook her head and sighed. If I can't figure it out, then don't think about it for now. Jiangnan is only a small fish. Jingdou is the big fish. Fan Xian's eyes were calm as he stared at the two slightly undulating lines on the surface of the lake. After a long time he said, fishing? I'm still worried whether I've caught a fish or if I've been dragged into the water by the fish and will never be able to climb back up. Haitang smiled and said, you've long gotten your feet wet by the river. Even if you don't want to step into the water, it's impossible. Fan Xian smiled bitterly and said, that's true. However, there is a sense of uncertainty. I don't like the feeling of having things that are not in my control. No one, not even the ruler of a country, can control everything, Haitang said quietly. I just have to try my best to grasp the bigger picture. That is already good enough. Just now, you said there were two people you had never been able to see through. One was Chen Pingping. Who was the other? Hai Tang was very interested in this question. She knew that Fan Xian was very confident in his ability to read people. He could even grasp certain aspects of the Qing Emperor's thoughts, yet he admitted there were people he could not see through. She very much wanted to know who the second person was. My father, Fan Xian said with a slight smile. Fan Xian smiled slightly and said, actually, he is the same as Chen Pingping. They are both very powerful figures. However, Chen Pingping has always been bobbing up and down on the surface of the water while he has always been at the bottom. Although I am his son, I do not know his true thoughts. Fan Xian treated Chen Pingping and Fan Jian as if they were his father. He was sincere and not suspicious. After his mother passed away, he took charge of vengeance. On the night of Jingdo's bloodshed 14 years ago, he cleanly washed the Empress's family in blood. Later, as he grew up, the care and love these two fathers gave him all made Fan Xian feel deep admiration. Strangely, it just so happened that the two people closest to him were the ones he could not see through the most. So, what you've always been worried about is not Jiangnan but Jingdo. Hai Tang smiled slightly. With these two unfathomable figures behind you, you indeed do not need to worry about the Jiangnan matter. I am the whetstone the emperor has set for those brothers. Fan Xian smiled slightly. This Jiangnan matter, the eldest princess, the crown prince, and the second prince, are they not whetstone's father and Chen Pingping have set for me? The elders all have high hopes for me. I am very gratified. The word gratified was said with incomparable annoyance. The two thin fishing lines continued to sink steadily into the gentle surface of the water. There was not the slightest tremor caused by the wrist. Hai Tang glanced at him and said, looks like you indeed don't need to use fishing to train your nature. Fan Xian said, my personality has always been firm and determined. My state of mind is calm. It is difficult for external things to haunt me. For Fan Xian, admitting his good points in front of a woman was not embarrassing to blow his own trumpet. Rather, it was a very good self-analyzing attitude. Just how old are you now? Hai Tang asked curiously. She could not understand how such a young person could suddenly grasp great power in his hands and deal with the complicated affairs of one side and still maintain such a calm state of mind. Fan Xian replied very quickly and asked back, how old are you this year? Hai Tang pressed her lips together. Her eyes were bright, making the blue lake in front of her lose its spirit. She refused to answer this question. Fan Xian huffed and said, I turned 18 on the 8th of the new year. Hai Tang shook her head mockingly and said, looking at the way you usually do things, it's not like no one would believe you if you said you were 80. Old people had experienced the spring wind, summer rain, autumn frost, and winter snow. They had long seen everything in the world. That was why they could use a pair of seemingly indifferent eyes to see through everything in this world. Only because they had experienced it could they look down on it. Only then could they use the calmest state of mind and the most ruthless methods to face those seemingly unusually complicated situations. A necessary foundation for a schemer was that he had fewer desires. Thus, there were fewer openings that could be used by the enemy. Thus, from ancient times until now, those who were famous for scheming were either old men or old women or eunuchs. Young people were always hot-blooded, such as the second prince, the crown prince, and even the eldest princess. Thus, they would sometimes make unwise choices. For someone like Fan Xian, who had the experience of 2 lives, although he had been given a sorrowful 80-year-old label by Hai Tang, when he did things, he was indeed as patient as an old man. While using Xia Qifei to fight the family property lawsuit against the Ming family, the rest of the Overwatch Council remained silent. It was not until the storm of the family property lawsuit was about to die down that the Overwatch Council acted. For a moment, many officials of Jiangnan Road were politely invited to the 4th Bureau Inspection Office in Jiangnan Road to drink tea. Everyone knew that the Overwatch Council's tea was authentic Longjing tea. The fragrance of the tea filled the air, but no official wanted to drink it. Although not many of the Jiangnan Road officials were detained for the sake of Governor Xueqing, during the process of drinking tea and chatting, the Overwatch Council would occasionally talk about some old matters that still made the officials tremble in fear. After they returned to their manners, They began to worry about their own futures and personal safety. Correspondingly, the officials who were reminded also noticed that they could no longer protect the Ming family too openly. On the other hand, the Overwatch Council also began to harass the Ming family's business. Although they could not directly seize people and seize goods, using the excuse of investigating Dongyi spies, within a day, the Ming family's shops began to be inspected by the government. The Ming family's fleet also encountered unprecedented trouble while transporting goods. Although the Overwatch Council did not find any major evidence against the Ming family other than a few small crimes of carrying personal goods, under the repeated harassment, they successfully forced the Ming family's favored industrial system to slow down. What the business was particular about was the speed at which goods could be transported and converted into cash. It was like an endless river. Presently, the Overwatch Council was like countless grains of sand slowly sinking into the river. As the flow of the river slowed, the silt also settled down. It was originally a pool of running water, but now it gradually became muddy, making it difficult to move around. The Overwatch Council's actions used the least manpower and aroused the least discussion, but the results achieved were quite good. After the Ming family had paid the palace treasury's large amount of bidding silver, for the first time in many years, they felt their cash flow was stretched thin. Now, they were being harassed by the Overwatch Council. Their cash flow was becoming less and less, and they were forced to transfer silver from Taiping Money House. At the same time, the eldest branch, Mingqingda, also began to secretly sign a bill of exchange from Zhaoshang Money House. To be continued. If you want to know what happened next, please log on to www.cmfu.com. More chapters. Support the author. Support original reading. Chapter 380. For many years, the Ming family had lived and multiplied in the Jiangnan area. After decades of careful management and bold expansion by several generations of masters, they finally became one of the largest families in the world. Later, they climbed onto the eldest princess relationship and became a palace treasury royal merchant. Using the endless flow of silver brought by the palace treasury goods, the Ming family's hands and feet extended even further and deeper. Not only did they own countless businesses in Suzhou and Hangzhou, directly controlling large amounts of ships, carriages, and shops, but the family members also indirectly controlled many unremarkable businesses that were deeply connected to the people of Jiangnan. For example, grain, oil, meals, brothels. Some people even said that as soon as a Jiangnan person opened their door, they would certainly come into contact with the Ming family's businesses. For such a large family, the factions within the family were unusually complicated. However, the highest power was still held by the 6 sons of the 2 branches of the Ming family. The other, more distant branches were only responsible for managing the middle and lower-level businesses. Because the old Ming matriarch deeply understood the danger of internal divisions in the family, the first arrangement she made after she took sole control of the Ming family was that other than the branch of the eldest branch, Mingqingda, all of the other 5 Ming children only had the right to receive dividends. They had no power to make any arrangements or suggestions regarding the Ming family's enormous businesses. They were strictly forbidden from participating in the family business. This arrangement was, without question, a wise one. At least it used such a powerful method to ensure the Ming family's unity and good cooperation on the surface. It did not produce the same problems as other families. Until now, the family could still be considered to be unified against outsiders. Although they could not participate in the family business, the other 5 masters received the large dividends from the family every year. They could not hide so much silver under the blankets and give birth to little silver chicks. They had to use it to invest in the outside world. Naturally, they also did a lot of business in Jiangnan. The Ming family used this method to stretch their hands further and further. In the end, the businesses of these branches still had to cling onto the Ming family. If the Ming family fell, the businesses of the 5 masters would also have major problems. Thus, they had to use the power in their hands to protect and escort the eldest branch. Thus, in Fan Xian's eyes, these businesses that did not belong to the Ming family in name still had the Ming surname. Naturally, the Overwatch Council began to harass these businesses equally. This time, the 5 masters could not stand it. They thought to themselves that they did not receive many benefits from the family, and they were still implicated. The more they did business, the more difficult it became. What could they do? Open your dog eyes and look, it's the 4th master in front of you. The 4th master of the Ming family was born of a concubine. His position in the family was not high, so he always liked to walk birds for fun to avoid offending the old matriarch and big brother. Each year, he used the silver he earned to do some business. He opened a vegetable and fruit trading business and did some business that the official fingers missed. Naturally, his days passed very smoothly. But recently, no matter what, he couldn't be happy. The trading company was being investigated every day, and business was slightly declining. Although the results weren't too serious, the bad trend was clear. The officials who usually nodded and bowed in front of him were also rarely willing to drink tea with him. He understood that the Overwatch Council had been frightened by those officials. However, it was not up to the person in front of him to provoke him. A glimmer of viciousness flashed across the 4th master's slightly pale face. He slapped the southern barbarian in front of him until he spun 3 times in place. A red handprint suddenly appeared on his face, and a trickle of blood flowed from the corner of his lips. The 4th master of the Ming family was the largest vegetable and fruit seller in Suzhou. He didn't look like much, but he had a monopoly on 30% of the Jiangnan fruit business. Including the matters of income to the palace, he single-handedly took care of it. There was no problem in calling him the king of melons. Furthermore, he relied on the Ming family's power to establish his own guild and take care of the entire Jiangnan fruit market. In all these years, there had never been a powerful figure who dared to come to his fields to pick some fruits to eat. However, a merchant had suddenly come from Lingnan and jumped over the agreement between the Ming and Xiong families. Without going through the 4th master's hands, he directly sold fruits to Suzhou. Lingnan's weather was hot and the fruit was beautiful. As long as the problem of long-distance transportation was solved, there would be great profits to be made. If that merchant had understood the rules, he would have first paid his respects to the 4th master after coming to Suzhou. Perhaps the 4th master would have nodded his head and given him some shares to do business. Who knew whether this merchant didn't understand the rules or if he had something he could rely on? He relied on the fact that he had a lot of goods and a low price to forcefully lower the price of melons in Suzhou and even Jiangnan by 20% within 10 days. This merchant's business also rapidly expanded. The 4th master's face was full of a sinister smile as he stared at the Lingnan merchant he had slapped to the ground. He chuckled and said, "Now who dares to bully the Ming family? A mere southern barbarian, where did you get the courage?" In reality, he knew that when his family's business began to be suppressed by the Overwatch Council, no matter how useful the Overwatch Council could be, once this kind of news spread and the trend took shape, countless merchant powers that had been suppressed by his family in the past would begin to stir. They would want to take advantage of the Ming family being badly battered to take advantage of the opportunity to gain some benefits. However, the 4th master could not do anything to Imperial Envoy Fan Xian. He didn't even have the time to be afraid. How could he allow a southern barbarian to mess around on his territory? Use a stick to teach him a lesson. The 4th master looked at the Lingnan melon merchant crying and begging for mercy on the ground. A glimmer of disdain flashed across the corner of his lips. As his voice fell, a wretched cry rang out again from the yard. The 4th master's subordinates held wooden sticks and smashed them viciously toward the Lingnan melon merchant's body. The blows rang out. Who knew how many of the poor merchant's bones had been broken? The wretched cries gradually quieted. His entire body was covered in blood as he was knocked unconscious. To the side, the trusted accountant's heart trembled as he watched this bloody scene. He moved closer and said, "4th master, this person should be someone from the Xiong family." "I know," the 4th master said in a severe voice. "Xiong Bailing, that old bastard, wants to use this melon merchant to test us. If I don't retaliate, he will actually think that the Ming family is easy to bully." The accountant smiled bitterly and said, "4th master, at this time of year, we can't bring trouble to the family." The 4th master thought of something and his expression darkened. The old matriarch is already beginning to suspect me. If I don't act rash right now, what should I do? Countless complicated emotions welled up in the accountant's heart. He didn't know what to say. The fourth master stood up from his chair and gazed at the blood-covered Lingnan merchant on the ground. In a dark voice, he said, "It's not that I won't let you do business, but doing business is not bullying people. You can't bully me." The Lingnan merchant had already woken up. Hearing these words, he was quite frightened and quickly nodded his head furiously. "Hand over 10,000 liang of silver. At the same time, bring the price back down. Let's compete fairly." The fourth master chuckled. His laughter was incomparably dark and severe. "You won't bully me, so naturally I won't bully you." After dealing with this person, the fourth master called for people to drag the merchant out. Looking at the bloodstains on the floor, he spat and cursed through gritted teeth. "Fan Xian bullied me, and I didn't retaliate. Who the F***ck is the Xiong family?" Returning to the room, the fourth master washed his hands and rolled up his sleeves. He took down the birdcage from the side of the corridor and began to play with it. He whistled, but his gaze was distant. The accountant followed behind him timidly and said in a low voice, "Fourth master, you're saying the matter of you meeting with Xia Qifei has been found out by the old matriarch?" The fourth master's body froze. Suddenly he cursed angrily, "Isn't it all your rotten idea? You said to have a foot in two boats, that the seventh Ming master had survived a great disaster, that he was bound to have good fortune in the future, and that he had the imperial envoy's support. The public property would eventually be taken back by him. You wanted me to meet him and speak first. F***ck. The next day, I was called over by the old matriarch to be scolded and almost didn't come out alive." He was incomparably angry. With great difficulty, he calmed the emotions in his chest and coldly said, "The Overwatch Council has been targeting our family recently. If I wasn't more vicious today, how would the old matriarch and big brother see me?" The accountant didn't dare to breathe loudly after being scolded by his master. With a sullen face, he said, "But Master Xia wanted to meet with you that day, and you had to refuse. Fourth master, you really don't want to hear what Master Xia said?" Seventh brother. The fourth master thought of his younger brother who had suddenly appeared and felt it was strange. Concerning the matter of Xia Qifei and his mother being harmed by the old Ming matriarch, he had only occasionally heard about it. He and his mother were clean, so he was not afraid of the other party like the eldest branch. Thinking of the words Xia Qifei had conveyed to the imperial envoy that day, a light flashed through his eyes. He sighed helplessly and said, "I'm afraid of the imperial envoy, but I'm even more afraid of the old matriarch. Furthermore, the Ming family is, after all, our Ming family. If they really listened to you and joined hands with Xia Qifei, with such a terrifying imperial envoy watching from behind, the Ming family would become the court's Ming family." The fourth master smiled wretchedly and said, "No matter how tyrannical the eldest branch is, we have been brothers for so many years. In the end, my surname is still Ming." The accountant didn't dare to continue persuading. The fourth master had officially rejected the good intentions Fan Xian had conveyed through Xia Qifei. Thus, the response from Hua Garden quickly arrived at the large manor he had bought in the south of Suzhou. The Suzhou government bailiffs pushed open the door and entered. Under the watchful gaze of the Ming family thugs, they trembled as they arrived at the Tang family home. They took out the notice and requested that the fourth master follow them back to the Suzhou government for a hearing. The fourth master had not expected that he would also be taken in for questioning. He yelled at the bailiffs in a stern voice, "Are you confused? Who is reporting me? What are you reporting me for?" The bailiffs had no choice. Otherwise, under normal circumstances, how would he dare to offend the true fourth master of the Ming family? Usually, he wished he could kneel on the ground and lick the other's boots. The bailiffs forced a smile and sent a gaze toward the fourth master, indicating that there was someone behind him. He lowered his voice and pleaded, "It is a Lingnan merchant. He is reporting that the fourth master of the Ming family is tyrannizing the market, injuring people, and allowing slaves to commit murder." The fourth master paused and furrowed his brows. He had not thought that the Lingnan merchant would dare to report him. Furthermore, he had not thought that the Suzhou government would accept this case. It had already been many years. The Ming family was special in Jiangnan. The Suzhou government had such a close relationship with the Ming family. How could they accept the Lingnan merchant's complaint? Although the Overwatch Council had recently been playing with the Ming family, the Overwatch Council's biggest problem was that they could not interfere with local government affairs. They also could not directly interfere with civil affairs. The Overwatch Council could not take the lead in such criminal cases. Thus, when he allowed slaves to commit murder earlier, he had not been too worried. However, the Suzhou government had actually sent someone. His gaze passed over the head of the bailiffs and saw an unfamiliar court official standing behind a few officials. Looking at the official's robes, the rank was not high. Furthermore, it did not look like the clothing of the court system. His eyes narrowed and guessed the other party's identity. From the moment the Lingnan merchant entered the courtyard, all of this had been watched by Overwatch Council officials. No wonder the other party had reacted so quickly. The fourth master's eyelids twitched. He knew he had miscalculated one thing. Although the Overwatch Council could not directly interrogate him, they could keep an eye on the Suzhou government. If the Suzhou government truly ignored him, the Overwatch Council would probably capture the Suzhou government officials and bring them back for questioning. With such a powerful deterrent here, no wonder the Suzhou government dared to capture him today. He laughed coldly and gazed at the bailiffs. So what if I don't go? The bailiffs were so anxious he was about to cry. He pleaded, "Fourth master, at least give the Zhizhou some face." The Ming family servants all began to clamor. Holding wooden sticks in their hands, they surrounded the bailiffs in the middle. Their cold gazes, intentionally or not, stared at the Overwatch Council official at the back of the crowd. The fourth bureau official of the Overwatch Council smiled slightly and said, "Brothers, what exactly are you planning to do? There seems to be someone here, preparing to rebel." Beating up officials and not listening to court orders, what was the difference between this and rebellion? Hearing these words, the Suzhou government official knew that this person had to be captured and brought back today. Otherwise, the Zhizhou would not be able to answer to the Overwatch Council. The Lingnan merchant's wretched state had already been seen by people in the court. Furthermore, people from Hua Garden had also come and were drinking tea in the tea shop opposite the court. None of their actions could be hidden from the imperial envoy's eyes. The official steeled his heart and looked at the fourth master and said, "Fourth master, please." He used his gaze to endlessly signal to the other party to let him understand that now was not the same as in the past. When it was time to submit, submit first. As for after he was taken into the Suzhou government, naturally, there would be a chance to turn things around. The fourth master lowered his head slightly and muttered to himself for a long time, forcefully suppressing the anger in his heart. He also understood what the situation was and nodded his head. The official let out a big breath and sighed, "Fourth master, pity me." The young Overwatch Council official of the fourth bureau looked at this scene with a cold smile from the back. The accounts master moved closer to the fourth master's side and worriedly said, "Fourth master, what do we do?" The fourth master laughed sinisterly and smashed the birdcage in his hand onto the ground, shattering it. Bird feathers flew chaotically, and bird blood splattered everywhere. He smiled coldly and said, "So be it. All these years, I've only had tea in the back garden of the Suzhou government. I haven't had the opportunity to see the true appearance of the Suzhou prison. Today, I'll go and open my eyes." He lowered his voice and hurriedly said, "Immediately send a message back to Ming Garden. Have Big Brother bail me out. Don't worry, the old matriarch will trust me even more because of this matter." After giving his orders, the fourth master of the Ming family was, for the first time in his life, invited back to the prison of the Suzhou government. Looks like fourth brother doesn't have any other intentions. After the news was sent back to Ming Garden, Ming Qingda sent people to open up the channels while he walked into the quiet courtyard his mother lived in. He reported to the old matriarch sitting on the chair, "I'll go and bring him back right now." Although a Lingnan merchant was injured and the Suzhou government is under pressure from the Overwatch Council to bring him back, the matter is not big. There shouldn't be any future trouble. Sir Fan Jr. will not be able to use this matter to bite fourth brother to death. On the chair, the old Ming matriarch sank into silence. Her old and sunken eyes were closed as if she was thinking about something. She still did not reply to Ming Qingda's words. Ming Qingda felt it was strange. A moment later, a chill surged through him. The old Ming matriarch slowly opened her listless eyes and said, "The Ming family is already in a precarious situation. Fourth brother first met with Xia Qifei in secret. This is disloyalty. Later, he acted rashly and caused the family to worry about him. This is unfilial. Such a disloyal and unfilial person, why protect him?" After Ming Qingda's silence, he became sorrowful again. The Ming family's predetermined strategy against Fan Xian's aggressive attacks was to retreat in order to advance and play with sadness. That was why he had knelt in the palace treasury and fallen ill afterward. Presently, the Overwatch Council was threatening fiercely. The Ming family was trembling and appeared very pitiful. However, the old Ming matriarch's intention seemed to be to open an even deeper wound on her family's wound. He took a deep breath and calmly said, "Presently, the situation is still within our grasp. Sir Fan Jr. can only walk on the periphery and cannot hold onto our true weakness. At this time, there is no need to sacrifice so much. After all, he is of the Ming family's blood." The old Ming matriarch glanced at him coldly and emotionlessly. "The imperial envoy will push harder and harder. In the end, we will need to sacrifice someone we can bring out in exchange for the sympathy of the Jiangnan people and the inclination of the gentry under heaven. Now that fourth brother has been taken into prison, isn't this the best opportunity? If people know that the imperial envoy forced an old master of the Ming family to death for money, the court will be shocked. We will receive a lot of benefits and time. This transaction is worth it." Ming Qingda's expression did not change. He thought for a moment and then said, "It's all as mother wishes." He knew that his fourth brother was, after all, the concubine's son. In his mother's eyes, he was a dispensable figure. The old Ming matriarch gazed at him coldly and said, "Is the family's cash flow this bad? Why do you often have to transfer money from Zhaoshang recently?" Ming Qingda smiled coldly in his heart and thought, "Taiping Money House's seal has always been in your hands. If I want to truly hold the Ming family in my hands, how can I not think of other ways?" Although he thought this in his heart, his mouth warmly explained a few things. The old Ming matriarch nodded and finally slowly said, "Only fourth brother is probably not enough for the hearts of the people under heaven to lean toward the Ming family. Qingda, you have to be prepared. Perhaps you will be forced to give up the position of master of the Ming family. Only then will the people under heaven realize the tragic state of the Ming family." Ming Qingda was slightly startled. He bowed deeply and left the room. Outside the courtyard, he smiled slightly at his son, Ming Launcher, who had been waiting for him the entire time. "Did you hear that?" Already said, "The one she loves the most is only your sixth uncle. Yesterday, I wrote Fan Xian's birthday incorrectly. My apologies. I'm not in a good mood, so I don't talk much. I also didn't reply to some of my book friends on QQ. Please forgive me." To be continued. If you want to know what happens next, please log on to www.cmfu.com. More chapters. Support the author. Support original reading. Chapter 381. Fan Xian did not know what was happening inside the Ming family. For him, the Ming family was a rock. He had to suppress it but temporarily could not crush it. In any case, he had the patience. There was no rush in fishing. That day, he came to the Suzhou branch of the Baoyue brothel. The business in the brothel had already picked up. The girls upstairs and downstairs were busy receiving customers. Not many people noticed the male owner and female shopkeeper respectfully protecting a person as they quietly went up to the top floor. Pushing open the window and looking out, he saw many workers digging mud to expand the lake. To expand a lake, the amount of money and labor needed was not a small amount. He couldn't resist sighing and asking, "Is there a need?" Shi Chanli smiled slightly and said, "According to Sir's intentions, the plans and layout of the branch were sent urgently to the north. The day before yesterday, the second young master's intention was that this lake is too small and the terrain is not open enough. The customers who come to play will feel a bit cramped, so it is better to put in a lot of effort and dig the lake a few hundred meters forward. Fan Xian smiled bitterly. It looked like Xijia, who was far away in northern Qi, still had Baoyue brothel on his mind. For such a large undertaking, he only had to say one word, yet Fan Xian had to mobilize many people to do it. There's sound and smell. Aren't you afraid it will affect business? It's surrounded by green cloth. Customers in the building usually won't notice that side. Although business is good right now, if we want to dig the lake, we can only do it now, otherwise, when spring is at its peak and summer is at its peak, it will be inconvenient to dig at that time. Fan Xian nodded and didn't say anything. He trusted his brother's business acumen. Today, he had come to Baoyue brothel mainly to find out some information. He looked at the file his subordinate had delivered and furrowed his brows. Where exactly did the Ming family housekeeper escape to? The Ming family housekeeper had the same surname as the housekeeper Fan Xian had beaten in Danzhou when he was a child. They were both surnamed Zhou. This person was not simple. After all these years, he had been the old Ming matriarch's trusted aide and was responsible for managing the accounts of the mysterious Juanshang Conference. After Xia Qifei was assassinated by the Juanshang Conference in front of the Jiangnan restaurant, the Overwatch Council had begun to secretly investigate the housekeeper's whereabouts. They were prepared to secretly arrest him at any moment and wanted to obtain some key information from his mouth. However, that housekeeper Zhou seemed to have disappeared within a day and did not appear in any of the Ming family property. No one knew if the Jiangnan road officials were helping him hide or something. In any case, even the Overwatch Council's methods had not been able to find a trace of his whereabouts. Deng Ziyu walked in from outside and reported to Fan Xian the matter of the fourth Ming master being taken into the Suzhou government. Hearing Fan Xian ask about housekeeper Zhou's whereabouts, he couldn't help but furrow his brows. He was responsible for this matter. After so many days without any progress, he also felt ashamed. He furrowed his brows and shook his head. He thought for a moment and said, if he hadn't been silenced by the Ming family, then it should be. There is a high possibility that the other party is openly hiding in the Ming garden, Fan Xian said. Fan Xian knew that if he really wanted to hide the account master of the Juanshang Conference, hiding him in the Ming garden was the riskiest and safest method. He couldn't resist smiling. Do I really have to go into the Ming garden to capture him? Deng Ziyu forced a smile and said, without concrete evidence, how can we enter the palace to capture him? The other party is also someone with a hereditary noble title. Furthermore, if we make the matter too serious, the governor will certainly be forced to open his mouth and pressure you. Fan Xian sighed and felt that this matter was gradually losing its fun. He waved his hand and said, if we charge in and can't capture him, it won't be easy to explain to Xueqing. If we can confirm that there is someone inside, we can try being barbaric for once. I just can't confirm it, Deng Ziyu said helplessly. The two of them were chatting when suddenly an Overwatch Council spy carefully knocked on the door. Deng Ziyu glanced at Fan Xian and walked out the door to say something in a low voice. His expression immediately became serious. He gave a few more reminders in a low voice and then quickly turned around. Leaning close to Fan Xian's ear, he said, there's news from the island. Fan Xian's spirits rose. That damned pirate dock had been quiet for so long. He almost thought that he could no longer use that little island to deal with the Ming family. Hearing that there was news, he said with great interest, speak. Deng Ziyu glanced at him again and carefully said, the people on the island are all dead. Completely dead. With a slap, Fan Xian slammed his palm against the tea table beside him without expression. The tea table did not shatter, nor did the teacup break. However, this slap clearly expressed his dissatisfaction and dissatisfaction. The Ming family had acted ruthlessly and cleanly. He furrowed his brows and asked, where are our people? The Overwatch Council had a spy on the island. Fan Xian was worried about his life and death. Deng Ziyu said, his luck is pretty good. He survived. The Quanzhou side found their way to the island and just happened to pick him up. Fan Xian's expression was slightly heavy. What is his name? Qinghua. Where is he? Just arrived in Suzhou. He is recovering in a secret residence. Let's go. Qinghua felt that he was dreaming. He had been dreaming these few days. After the island had been surrounded by the soldiers, only he had survived. Surrounded by the sky full of pirate gulls and the ground full of dead bodies, he had tried to find the path his leader had once left behind. He had gone to that hidden little cove and found a boat to go out to sea. He had not thought that the Ming family would be so ruthless in silencing him. All of the boats on the island had been destroyed. Even the 3-sail fast boats the pirate leader had hidden had sunk to the bottom of the water. Looking at the sails that had changed color after being soaked in the water, Qinghua felt a bit hopeless. The island was isolated beyond the sea. If the Chuanzhou side discovered that the situation had changed and took the risk to send people to the island again, it would still take a long time. He had been alone on the island without water or food these days. Could he survive? The spies of the 2nd and 4th Bureau of the Overwatch Council had to undergo harsh wilderness survival training and intelligence gathering training from the beginning of their admission. It was only because of this skill that the single Qinghua had managed to survive on the island. There was no water on the island. Fortunately, it had rained. There were no wild animals on the island, but there were corpses. There were pirate gulls that ate the corpses, and there were fish and clams in the sea. Thus, he was still strong and disgustingly able to survive. It was not until his colleagues from Chuanzhou took the risk to go to the island again that the extremely weak Qinghua was finally lifted onto the boat. The boat floated back to the mainland. Qinghua was finally able to have a good sleep. In his dreams, he thought of the water birds he had eaten and the rotting human flesh in the stomachs of those water islands. Qinghua still couldn't help but have nightmares. He slept for a long time, from Chuanzhou all the way to Suzhou. When he woke up, he found there was a young and delicate official in front of him looking at him with admiration and pity. The Overwatch Council official beside him reminded him, "It's the commissioner." The commissioner? Qinghua was startled and struggled to get up and bow. Fan Xian quickly stopped him on the bed and narrowed his eyes slightly. Looking at this Qing Kingdom version of Lu Binxuan, a sigh and admiration welled up in his heart. Political struggles were not treating people to a meal. It was a matter of life and death. However, it was often the lower-level officials who needed to be sacrificed. Fan Xian took out a pill and fed it to him. He then used a golden needle to help him circulate his blood. After carefully treating him for a long time, he confirmed that there wouldn't be too many sequelae and that the other party had enough energy to speak. Only then did he begin to ask questions. In their conversation, Fan Xian obtained a lot of useful information. There was a lot of information that had not been sent ashore in time, such as the connection between the pirate leader and Ming Launcher's concubine. He coldly said, "No wonder that concubine would suddenly return home to visit relatives. I'm afraid she has long sunk into the river to feed the tortoises. Marrying a tortoise, in the end, she can only feed the tortoises. She is also a pitiful person. Ziyu, immediately send people to the concubine's home to investigate. I want to see how Ming Launcher is going to explain." Qinghua had also painstakingly kept a copy of the letter. This was also a very solid piece of evidence. Although the Ming family could still deny it, they could always use this to make an issue of it. "Do you have any thoughts about the soldiers who came to the island?" Fan Xian stared into Qinghua's eyes and asked. Although he knew that it had not been easy for him to survive on the island and he had experienced a long journey once on land and was extremely weak, he had no choice but to ask clearly. This reality was like a thorn in his heart and made him wary. That group of sailors was clearly a helper for the Ming family and had been sent by the eldest princess. Fan Xian wanted to know just who in the military was standing on the eldest princess' side. Presumably, the emperor was also very interested in this matter. It could not be Yan Xiaoyi. Although Yan Xiaoyi was the Qing Kingdom's northern governor with his superior 9th-level status, his military power had always been closely watched by the Overwatch Council. Fan Xian knew that Yan Xiaoyi did not have much power in the navy. Back then, the Chuanzhou Navy was the strongest naval force of the imperial court. Deng Ziyu glanced at Fan Xian and quietly said, "However, after the Yi family matter, In order to clear away the Yi family's influence in the Chuanzhou Navy, the court reduced the Chuanzhou Navy into 3. Presently, the Jiangnan Navy's nominally main yamen is in Shazhou. You should have met with the officials there. To enter the sea from Shazhou and land on the island to kill people, the distance is too far. Furthermore, the voyage is all on the Yangtze River. It is easy to reveal traces. In my opinion, it shouldn't be them. Fan Xian nodded. He did not have any emotional fluctuations because of the words, Yi family. He turned his head to look at Qinghua. On the bed, Qinghua's lips had white bubbles forming on them. He was also trying hard to remember the soldier who had landed on the island that night. He knew this matter was very important and could allow the council to determine just who dared to be in cahoots with the pirates. With great difficulty, he opened his mouth and said, "When the official ship landed on the island, it was just before dawn. There were many reefs around the island. Under such a dark sky, to be able to forcefully land on the island, it should be a professional navy and not a soldier on shore borrowing a ship. I once saw the face of a soldier clearly. Looking at the contours of his face, he should be someone from the north." Fan Xian's brows furrowed. Could it be Dongyi's navy? Qinghua shook his head with difficulty and reported, "They occasionally opened their mouths to speak, but it was not a Dongyi accent." Fan Xian gazed at Deng Ziyu and saw the glimmer of unease in each other's hearts. The Qing kingdom had 3 great navies. In the north was the Jiaozhou Navy, stationed near Shandong Road, and had great power. If the other party was a capable general on the eldest princess side, then the power the eldest princess held in the military was much more powerful than they had previously imagined. In Fan Xian's heart, since the emperor had always been stingy in letting him hold a sliver of military power and had always appeared so confident and arrogant, he believed that the majority of the power of the Qing kingdom's military was in the emperor's hands. Under such a premise, Fan Xian would have more confidence when he did things. Now, he had suddenly discovered that the eldest princess and the prince's power had increased by leaps and bounds. How could Fan Xian not be wary? The Yi family would gradually lean toward the second prince, the northern governor Yan Xiaoyi, and now there was another navy. Whose people are the Jiaozhou Navy? Fan Xian furrowed his brows and asked. Deng Ziyu lowered his voice and said, "The admiral of the navy is a first-level military general. Naturally, he doesn't have to listen to Yan Xiaoyi's orders. I've never felt that he has any inclinations. After all, he comes from the Qin family, but his relationship with Yi Zhong's faction is not bad." Fan Xian gently tightened his fist and shook his head. He didn't say anything more. Looking at the tired Qinghua on the bed, a faint smile rose to his face. "Recover well. After you recover, follow me and do things." He greatly admired this young Overwatch Council official who was able to hide on the pirate island and successfully survive. Such an outstanding talent should become his trusted aide. Qinghua was shocked. He had not expected that after his narrow escape, he would have such good luck. For a moment, he froze on the bed, not knowing what to say. It was not until Fan Xian led the Qinian unit out of the room and the 4th Bureau of the Overwatch Council's Inspection Division stationed in Chuanzhou smiled and congratulated him that he came to his senses. He knew he had finally made it. The nightmare had finally woken up. Fan Xian was a bit angry. Everything he had encountered today was not good news. It looked like he had to quickly send the council report back to Jingdou and have the old cripple be more spirited and not always stay in Qingarden looking at beautiful women. If your successor ran into a problem, you had to solve it, right? "Sir, there's good news." Just as Fan Xian was silently cursing his bad luck, Deng Ziyu suppressed a glimmer of joy and respectfully reported. "What news?" "That accountant of the Juanshang conference. We have the whereabouts of him." "Where is he?" "Sir is wise. The news is accurate. That person is in Ming Garden." Fan Xian pressed his palms together and sighed. "Finally, there's something to do. Not in a good mood. Not in a good state. Write less." If you want to know what happened next, please log on to www.cmfu.com. More chapters. Support the author. Support original reading. Chapter 382. In the middle of April, the feeling of spring was bright and beautiful. All of Jiangnan was enveloped in a warm wind. The people walking on the streets were already beginning to only wear lined clothes. Outside Jingdou, thousands of miles away from Suzhou, one could still see the patch of white snow on top of the Tsang mountain from a long distance. It was as cold as the white cloth covering the face of a corpse. The tall man wearing the straw hat withdrew his gaze from the white snow on top of the Tsang mountain and silently drank the remaining tea in his cup. He ordered a bowl of plain noodles and began to eat without much taste. This place was 30 li outside of Jingdou. It was called Sherpai village. This tall man wearing the straw hat was the second priest of the Qing temple who had traveled with great difficulty from Jiangnan to Jingdou, Great Master Sanshi. Great Master Sanshi had not come to the capital to discuss the Tao or to pluck the willows outside the imperial road. He had come to kill. He had come to assassinate the emperor. Although Fan Xian had intentionally or unintentionally let him leave in Jiangnan, the Overwatch Council's investigation was strict. Even though the Northwest Road had not been heavily guarded, it still took Sanshi a great deal of time to get around the Overwatch Council and Black Knight's blockade and come to Jingdou. The Juanshang Conference was indeed a loose organization. However, once this organization possessed an unusually sacred and important mission, its importance became apparent. Not many people knew just how many important figures of the powers in the world were gathered by this mysterious organization. Although Great Master Sanshi was honored as the second priest of the Qing temple, he did not have much power to speak in the Juanshang Conference. Furthermore, he was personally opposed to the Juanshang Conference's arrangements in Jiangnan. After his unsuccessful attempts to interfere with Fan Xian's administration, Great Master Sanshi made himself a sacrificial pawn and broke away from the Juanshang Conference's arrangements. Alone with great ambitions and a red sun hidden in his heart, he proudly headed to Jingdou. He was going to Jingdou to kill people that could not be killed. As he thought this, he silently ate his noodles. Following his elder brother's earnest teachings, he chewed each noodle carefully and slowly until it became a paste. Only then did he swallow it with satisfaction. For some reason, Great Master Sanshi ate with sorrow and found it difficult to control himself. 2 muddy tears slid down from his old eyes and dripped into the noodle soup. He was going to enter the capital to ask the emperor why. After finishing the noodles, he put on the bamboo hat to cover his face. He picked up the wooden staff that was as tall as a person and left the noodle shop. Following the small path at the foot of Sherpai village, he began to walk in the direction of the capital. In front of them was the dark imperial city, and behind them was the pure white mountain. The ascetic monks were walking in the middle. The forest grew deeper and the road narrower. It was still early, so there were no woodcutters diligently getting up to chop firewood. It was also impossible for any pedestrians to pass by in the wilderness. The mountain road was quiet, so quiet that it was a little strange. There was not even the sound of birds or insects. After all, Great Master Sanshi was not a warrior skilled in assassination. He was just an ascetic monk with a very high cultivation. Although he felt it was a little strange, he did not pay it much attention. The court and the Juanshang Conference should not know that he had come from Jiangnan to Jingdou. The only person who knew of this matter was the northern Qi saint girl, Haiti. No matter how one looked at it, it was impossible for Haitang to reveal his whereabouts. Great Master Sanshi believed this very much. He did not think that anyone would know his path in advance and set up an ambush ahead of time. Thus, when that mournful and deadly arrow shot out of the dense forest and viciously pierced into his eye socket, Great Master Sanshi felt very surprised. The way the arrow flew was very strange. At the beginning, it was silent, like a ghost or a demon. Only when it was only 3 feet away from his face did it suddenly let out a shrill whistle. The whistling sound of the arrow was enough to take away one's soul, incomparably terrifying. The long black arrow seemed to cry out the word kill. Great Master Sanshi gave a muffled grunt. His long wooden staff stabbed viciously into the ground. The head of the staff, carved into the shape of a bird's head, stretched forward in a very short time and blocked the arrow that seemed to have flown from the sky. With a muffled sound, the arrow shot viciously into the head of the wooden staff. The boundless power contained in the arrow shook Great Master Sansher's wrist slightly. In an instant, the bird's head carved on the head of the staff exploded. Great Master Sansher narrowed his eyes. A chill rose in his heart. It seemed that only the governor of the north, Yan Xiaoyi, had such a lightning-fast archery skill. Yan Xiaoyi should be in Sangzhou at this time, thousands of li from Jingdou. Separated by the leaves in the forest, Great Master Sansher's clear eyes saw clearly the archer's face. It was a young and unfamiliar face. He knew that the arrow he had personally received must have been taught by Yan Xiaoyi. This unfamiliar young man must be Yan Xiaoyi's disciple. While he was thinking of these things, Great Master Sansher had already used the rebound of the staff to fly into the air. Like a large bird, he spread his body. Holding the wooden staff in his hand, he smashed it like a mad demon. Although he didn't know why the other person wanted to kill him, before he entered Jingdou and asked the emperor that question, he would not allow himself to die. Great Master Sansher's figure was tall and sturdy. He wore a straw hat on his head. His staff was full of murderous intent. His entire body floated in the air like a vicious large bird, filled with an aura of no return. When fighting against a godly archer, the most important thing was to close the distance between them. However, leaping into the air and exposing all of one's openings to the opponent, and one had nowhere to borrow strength from in the air, it was even more difficult to dodge those ghostly arrows. Great Master Sansher swept over and looked at the archer's calm face. He knew that the other party wanted to take the opportunity to shoot. As expected, the archer didn't know how to move. His hands flashed and he had already taken out an arrow from behind him, knocked it, took aim, and fired. These were 3 simple actions, but they were completed naturally, harmoniously, and quickly. It was as if they were inseparable actions. It was very beautiful. This kind of simple beauty came from his daily hard practice and talent in archery. With a whoosh, the second arrow shot toward Great Master Sansher's throat. At this moment, he was in the air and had no way of dodging such a swift arrow. However, Sansher had been waiting for this moment. He gave a muffled grunt and did not dodge. He circulated his junqi to his abdomen and used his stupidest and most powerful iron shirt to forcefully block this arrow. The arrow hit his throat and made a strange gurgling sound. A strange light flashed through Great Master Sansher's eyes. His entire body had already charged toward the archer and struck out with his staff. At this moment, there was only 3 feet between the two of them. How could the archer dodge? The archer's expression was still calm. Facing the crazed staff, he steadily took 2 steps back. Holding his longbow in front of his body, he spat out one word from his mouth, "Seal." 4 golden knives came out of nowhere and turned into 4 streams of light, sealing Great Master Sansher's killing blow. A loud explosion rang out. The knives shattered, the staff was in chaos, and a cloud of dust filled the forest. Amidst the dust filling the air, the sound of an arrow rang out again. A soul-stealing arrow pierced through the dust and the forest. In a very short distance, it once again shot toward Great Master Sansher's throat. The distance was too close. Great Master Sansher had no time to dodge, and he didn't dare let his weakest throat be continuously tested by the Yan family's archery skills. Thus, he raised his palm and took a saluting posture. The other party had used 4 knives to seal his staff, so he would use 1 palm to seal this arrow. That slender, soul-eating arrow nailed itself to the edge of Great Master Sansher's thick and calloused palm. It was like a mosquito staring at a pitiful person's flesh. It swayed a few times before landing on the ground. It was only a very light sting, a nail. Great Master Sansher's body began to sway violently. He was shaken by this arrow and took a step back. Another arrow arrived. Great Master Sansher raised his palm again, sealed, and retreated again. The arrows shooting out of the dust grew faster and faster. It was as if they would never stop. Who knew what kind of terrifying hand speed the archer behind the dust had? If so, there were 9 arrows. Great Master Sansher was shaken back 9 steps and forced back to the side of the mountain path by those terrifying arrows. He gave a muffled grunt and junqi flowed through his arms. With a wave of his long staff, he sent the last arrow flying. Then he felt his feet tighten. A terrifying animal trap made a gurgling sound and clamped down on his right foot. This animal trap was so big that it was probably used to trap tigers. Even though Great Master Sanshur had the unbreakable power of the Iron Shirt, suddenly encountering a trap, the flesh on his calf still split open and blood spurted out. Great Master Sanshur let out a pained cry. He furrowed his unwilling brows tightly. There was also a small spot of blood on his throat. The hand holding the wooden staff also had many small spots of blood slowly seeping out. With so many unpredictable and sharp arrows, if it had been anyone else, they would have long been shot into a porcupine. Only he had not suffered any true injuries. Unfortunately, in the end, he was still forced into the trap by these arrows. The dust gradually settled. In the opposite forest, the face of the young archer once again appeared, along with 4 knife-wielding men. Great Master Sanshur looked coldly at the other party and said, "I didn't think it would be you who killed." Before he finished speaking, the young archer had come to silence him and had no interest in conversing with Great Master Sanshur. Although he knew that Great Master Sanshur was also a legendary figure, the younger generation had grown up and did not have much reverence in their hearts. The young man used the steady fingers of his right hand to place the poisoned arrow on the bowstring. Once again, he aimed at the throat of the immobile Great Master Sanshur. "Shoot!" As he spoke, the arrow in his hand did not leave the bowstring. The forest was in chaos. Countless archers surged out from all directions. Separated by a distance of dozens of feet, they surrounded Sanshur in the center. They all held bows and arrows in their hands. Following the word "shoot," countless long arrows left the bowstring. They transformed into soul-stealing straight lines and viciously pierced toward Great Master Sanshur's body in the center. Sanshur's pupils constricted slightly. Looking at the other party's arrangement, he knew that he might not survive today. To be able to arrange so many archers in the mountain, they must be people from the military. No matter how powerful an ace, when faced with the merciless and cold-blooded attacks of the military, they would not be able to survive. Furthermore, his right foot had already been caught in that hateful beast trap. He was not Yi Luyun or Kuhi. Great Master Sanshur sighed in his heart and waved the long staff in his hand, blocking the rain of arrows coming from all directions. Clang, 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 countless shattering sounds rang out around his body. In just a moment, hundreds of flying arrows had been shattered by his wooden staff. The broken arrows piled up around his body. It looked unusually sad. Some arrows pierced through his defensive circle and stuck into his body. However, these archers were not as good as the young man earlier and were unable to pierce through Great Master Sanshur's iron shirt. The leading young archer was not in a hurry. He only looked coldly at Great Master Sanshur, who was struggling like a dying beast. He watched this ascetic monk helplessly fight against the sky full of arrows. He knew that the other party's Jinchi was strong. If he wanted to kill him from a distance, he needed to be patient and continue to waste time. As long as Sanshur's Jinchi showed the slightest sign of waning, he would not be able to maintain his ability to stab. Once the arrows entered his body, that would be the time of Sanshur's death. Thus, he only aimed at Sanshur's throat and coldly waited for that moment. The dozens of archers in the forest only coldly and endlessly shot arrows. Sanshur howled loudly and endlessly waved his wooden staff, struggling in the rain of arrows. Eventually, there would come a time when his strength was exhausted. At this moment, Sanshur's bravery and might looked so sad. Faced with powerful military machines, what use was a martial ace? What a cruel scene it was. The merciless shooting continued. The broken arrows piled higher and higher in Great Master Sanshur's body. Gradually, they went past his calf and completely submerged the animal trap and injured leg in the arrows. It looked like a self-immolating monk who was endlessly chopping at the pile of firewood that was about to ignite himself. Great Master Sanshur's clothes were already soaked with sweat. The speed at which he waved his wooden staff had also slowed. It was clear that his Jinchi was not as abundant as before. It was this opportunity that the leading archer, who had been waiting for a long time, gently released his middle finger. The arrow on the bowstring shot out. With a swoosh, the entire forest and the entire world seemed to have quietened down in an instant. Great Master Sanshur held the arrow in his throat. His mouth made gurgling sounds, but he could no longer say anything. Fresh blood flowed out of his palm. The archers around him also stopped shooting. The young archer furrowed his brows and coldly and emotionlessly said, "Continue." The power of the arrows rose again. In an instant, Sanshur's body was pierced by a dozen arrows. Fresh blood dyed his entire body red. Sanshur slowly closed his eyes and sighed again in his heart. He knew that showing weakness to lure the enemy was not feasible. When Yan Xiaoyi's disciple did things, he indeed had the cold and emotionless style of his teacher. He waved his hand, and his large sleeve brushed away a number of arrows. His eyes opened and a bright light flashed. With an explosive roar, the wooden staff he had been holding in his hands split open from the outside by this pure jinqi. Pieces of wood flew in all directions, revealing the knife inside. In Suzhou, Sanshur had once used one knife to cut through a long street. At this moment, his knife could only cut toward himself. Slashing down diagonally, the edge of the knife entered the flesh without a sound. He ruthlessly chopped off his right calf. He would no longer be trapped in the animal trap. Sanshur was like a large bird with broken wings. Once again he ruthlessly flew into the air. Like a goshawk hunting a rabbit, he killed his way into the enemy ranks. The knife light splashed like snow, causing people to spray blood. In one exchange, he cut off 3 heads and broke open the chests of a number of people. The forest was a scene of bloody slaughter. What a tyrannical knife! When Sanshur struck, the cold young archer had already turned and left. Silently, he climbed up a tree and began to shoot arrow after arrow. He knew that the other party was already at the end of his strength. He had also cut off his own leg and blood flowed freely. The other party wouldn't be able to hold out for much longer. As expected, after the knife light dazzled for a moment, it gradually dimmed. After killing a ground full of archers, the poison in Sanshur's body flared up. His injuries flared up, and he ran out of blood. Dropping the hilt of his long knife to the ground, he gave a muffled grunt and spat out his last breath. The second priest of the Qin temple was dead. After confirming Sanshur's death, the archers surrounded him. They were all elites of the military. They had come to surround and kill, and even shamelessly murder, the second priest of the Qin temple. Not everyone could maintain their calm on the surface, particularly after the other party had fallen into their trap and was still able to cut off his own leg and kill so many of their brothers. When these people thought back to it, they couldn't help but feel a chill in their hearts. "Clean it up. You all return to camp," the young archer said coldly. "Ding Han, you're in charge of cleaning up." A soldier bowed in a low voice in acknowledgement. The woods once again returned to peace. The soldiers who were good at shooting took off their disguises and found another secret place to change and return to camp. After exiting the woods, the young archer had already changed into a commoner's clothing. He did not follow the group back to camp. Instead, he turned left and right out of the woods and found the official road back to the capital. On the way, he hitched a ride in a carriage. Along the way, he chatted and laughed with the merchant as he entered Jingdo. After entering Jingdo, the archer first ate 2 bowls of vegetable porridge and then bought a paper windmill on the side of the street. He passed through the main street in the south of the city and walked through a secluded alley. Stopping at the door of a storytelling hall, he seemed to not be able to resist the temptation of the storybooks. He entered the building and asked for a cup of tea and a plate of melon seeds. He then began to listen. After listening for a while, he seemed to have the urge to pee and went to the bathroom. Behind the bathroom, he exited the courtyard wall. After confirming that no one was following him, he entered a manor. He didn't know whose family this manor belonged to. He walked as easily and freely as if he were in his own home. Entering the study, he knelt in front of the desk and reported to the pair of small and delicate feet under the table, "Your Highness, it has been eliminated. You've worked hard." The eldest princess of Qin Kingdom, Li Yunrui, smiled slightly. When this woman, who was so beautiful that she did not seem mortal, smiled, it added a sense of charm. When the young archer killed Great Master Sanshur, he appeared cold and heartless. At this moment, he did not dare meet the eldest princess's eyes. After rising, he stood obediently to the side. Sanshur, what a pity! The eldest princess sighed with great regret. He didn't listen to my words and insisted on imitating the bravery of an ignorant man. At this time, how could we make the emperor suspicious of us? Everything is not ready. Now is not the time to act. For someone like him who doesn't listen, we can only let him go. The young archer remained silent and did not say a word. He knew that these major matters should be the concerns of the elders. He only needed to carry them out. The eldest princess glanced at him and said with a slight smile, "You can't follow Governor Yen into battle in the north. Do you have any complaints?" The young archer smiled and said, "Father only drinks all day in the north. How can it compare to the excitement of the capital?" After saying a few more words, the eldest princess allowed him to leave the study. This manner was nameless. No one knew that the eldest princess would occasionally come here. She liked to sit alone in this study and think about things. She would often think about herself until she was crazy. Juanshang Conference? A self-mocking smile rose to the corners of her lips. When she was young, what was her goal in organizing the Juanshang Conference? It was to do something for the Qin kingdom. It was to help her brother the emperor do things that he found inconvenient, such as killing an official or stealing someone's property. Although her brother the emperor had never known of the existence of the Juanshang Conference, the Juanshang Conference had helped him a great deal in secret, such as the battle with Northern Qi and the secret influence on Dongyi. But when did such a huge change happen? The purpose of the Juanshang Conference had undergone such a great change in her hands. A glimmer of misery flashed across the eldest princess's face. She thought of Fan Xian far away in Jiangnan, the palace treasury, the Overwatch Council, and the suspicions and inclinations the emperor had shown these 2 years. "I gave the emperor a pearl. What did the emperor give me?" She closed her eyes and then opened them again. Her gaze had already recovered its calm. She smiled slightly and thought, "Since the emperor does not accept me, I should cherish myself." It was not impossible to pay a price for this. Sir Yuan's words did indeed have his reasons. It was still the same patch of forest. Other than the faint smell of blood, there was no trace of a previous attack. It looked like the military's handling of the scene was no worse than the Overwatch Council's. Everyone had already left. Ding Han, who had been left behind by Yan Xiaoyi's son to take care of the aftermath, was the last to leave the forest. Strangely, not long after he left, he silently returned to the forest. Under a pile of mud, he found a broken arrow that he had purposely hidden earlier and carefully tucked it into his clothes. Following this, he spat on his hands and began to dig with great difficulty. After digging for an indeterminable amount of time, he finally reached a very deep place and dug out the bodies that had already been burned beyond recognition. After confirming that it was Sanshur's body, he pulled out a dagger from his boot and inserted it into the neck bone of the body. Very carefully, he chopped off Great Master Sanshur's head. He refilled the soil, scattered leaves, and spread moss. After confirming that there were no problems, this person called Ding Han sighed with satisfaction and turned to leave the forest. He didn't need to enter Jingdo because the place he was going to was outside Jingdo. In the back mountain of Qin Garden, the back door, the wooden arch, and the old servant. The old servant accepted a box and a package from his hands. Ding Han silently bowed and began to return to the camp. In a dark and cold room, Chen Pingping sat in a wheelchair and looked with a slight smile at the charred head on the cloth. "Do you think, it's already been burned to this extent, will the emperor still be able to recognize that idiot Sanshur?" The old servant chuckled and couldn't say anything. He only saw that the old master seemed to be happy, so he was also happy. Chen Pingping once again took out the broken arrow from the box and looked at it with narrowed eyes for a while. Suddenly, in a sharp voice, he said, "Sanshur is an idiot. Do you think the eldest princess is also an idiot?" She could have used anyone, but she used Yan Xiaoyi's son. Admittedly, she can tie Yan Xiaoyi tighter, but it would also be easy for her to be exposed, no? It was clear that this director of the Overwatch Council did not think much of the scheming ability of the younger generation. He used his withered hands to gently stroke the wool blanket on his knees and shook his head. In this world, there are always some people who think that there are some things that no one will ever know, such as that bullshit Juanshang conference. The old servant quietly said, "Are we going to enter the palace?" The commissioner's side seems to be a bit difficult to make a move. The old servant had been Chen Pingping's trusted aide and housekeeper for 20 years. He knew most of the director's thoughts and carefully reminded him. Chen Pingping sank into silence. A moment later, he said, "Fan Xian might still act too early, but let him do it. Let him do what he thinks is right. As for the things he might not want to do, I'll do it." There were many things that Chen Pingping would never tell Fan Xian because he knew that Fan Xian's heart was far from being as hard and strong as his. He pushed the wheelchair to the window. In the distance came the faint sounds of laughter from the beautiful women the old man had collected. He looked outside and thought of Yuan, who had always been by the eldest princess's side. He couldn't resist smiling innocently like a child. Often, the things that enemies don't want me to know, I actually know, but a glimmer of self-mockery flashed through the old man's eyes. He sighed and said, "Sometimes, being a person who knows everything is not a happy thing." The old servant gently massaged his shoulders. He knew that tomorrow, the director would bring the head and the broken arrow into the palace. The Juanshang conference would appear in front of the emperor for the first time, and the emperor would finally make up his mind. What the director needed was for the emperor to make up his mind. Chen Pingping slowly lowered his head. If he didn't stir up some big trouble and kill a few nobles in the palace, how could he be willing to let go and die? Chapter 383. The emperor was not in a good mood. Everyone in the palace and court knew that the emperor had not been in a good mood these few days. The emperor had even stopped his regular program of watching plays with the Empress Dowager every 10 days. Other than the daily court conferences, not many people had the opportunity to see the emperor. Eunuch Yao, Eunuch Ho, and the now reinstated Eunuch Dai had been surrounded by officials outside the palace every day. Everyone wanted to know exactly what had happened. The emperor also did not summon his trusted officials into the palace. Looking at it, it did not seem that he was worried about something. Everyone knew that the emperor was not in a good mood. In the court conference, most of the memorials from various provinces had been rejected. The official of the Supreme Court had been harshly scolded. Old Qin of the Bureau of Military Affairs had also been scolded by the emperor. The Qin family was the emperor's most trusted aide and an important official in the military. Under normal circumstances, the emperor would always leave the Qin family some face in front of the civil and military officials. Now, he had treated them harshly. The expressions of the Jingdo garrison Qin Heng and General Qin did not change. When they entered and left the Hall of Governmental Affairs, they still maintained their bright smiles. It looked like they did not care much about the emperor's scolding of their family. Seeing this, the officials understood that the emperor was using the scolding of his trusted aide to remind some other people in the capital. This was a very chaotic method. No one could guess who the emperor wanted to remind, but they knew that the matter of reminding already existed. As expected, on the third day, Yizhong, far away in Dingzhou, once again sent a pained memorial to the emperor saying that now that the world was at peace, there was no longer a need for Dingzhou to maintain too many military forces and that some people should be dismissed. Asking to be dismissed was the Yi family's fearful stance. The emperor lightly allowed it. He did not allow the court conference or the Bureau of Military Affairs to debate this matter. The officials, including the newly appointed Hu the Scholar and Shu the Scholar, all thought this was a follow-up to last year's Hanging Temple incident and did not think of anything else. After the Yi family asked to be dismissed, the emperor's mood seemed to improve slightly. He resumed his daily greetings to the Empress Dowager. At the same time, he allowed the eldest princess to once again live in the palace. Guangxin Palace once again truly opened its doors for the eldest princess. Distance made beauty, but it also made danger. A family living together would certainly be much safer. This was probably what the emperor thought, the old man in the Qin garden thought. He sighed, knowing that things did not go according to his plan. He still needed to do something. However, since the seeds had begun to sprout under the cultivation of the black soil in people's hearts, there would be a day when poisonous vines would grow and break through the layer of hard rock that was pressing on it. Only the people who lived in the palace knew that the emperor's mood had not truly improved. His face still carried a trace of worry and slight sadness. The emperor was the master of the world and the master of the palace. He was the object that everyone needed to look at. He was the object that everyone entrusted their lives to. He was the hope of everyone's future and wealth. Thus, everyone in the palace was carefully and nervously guessing what other thoughts the emperor was hiding in his heart. The few old eunuchs who served in Taiji Palace and the royal study had long become shrewd people. Of course, they refused to make a sound when the various palaces probed. Furthermore, under Eunuch Hong's accumulated power, the nannies and eunuchs of the various palaces did not dare to ask too obviously. After the eldest princess moved gloomily into Guangxin Palace, she immediately recovered her usual beautiful appearance. Every day, she went to the Empress Dowager's side to chat with her. Occasionally, she would go to the Eastern Palace to see the Empress and Crown Prince. However, she herself was a bit confused. She didn't know what exactly the emperor was thinking. At this time, a head eunuch in the Eastern Palace became a very important figure. He was called Hong Zhu and had always worked at the emperor's side. He was deeply liked by the emperor. Furthermore, it was rumored that he had some sort of relative relationship with Eunuch Hong. He was also familiar with the people in Taiji Palace and the royal study. If such a person was sent to scout for information, he should be the most suitable candidate. Hong Zhu had already been the head of 4th-level eunuchs in the Eastern Palace for 3 months. Relying on the identity that the emperor had sent and his own careful and appropriate service, he had already received the empress' approval. Of course, he could not immediately be accepted. However, the empress had also given Hong Zhu enough benefits. She also wanted to see whether or not Hong Zhu could be used and to what extent he could be used. The empress smiled slightly as she looked at Hong Zhu kneeling in front of her. She somewhat liked this little eunuch's knowledge and tactfulness. His features were delicate and pretty. In a quiet voice, she said, "The emperor is worried about national affairs. Naturally, I also want to share the emperor's burden. Although the back palace cannot recklessly interfere in national affairs, knowing the emperor's mood can make some soup for him to make the emperor more comfortable." Hong Zhu flatteringly said, "The empress has thought of everything. Go ask." The empress sighed. The empress sighed and said, "If His Majesty finds out, there is no need to hide it. It is not a shameful matter. Don't harm yourself." Hong Zhu's expression was moved. He accepted the order and left. Not long after, this newly popular person in the palace walked a few laps around the huge palace. After being flattered, he didn't dare to continue accepting compliments and quickly returned to the Empress Palace. He leaned close to the Empress's ear and quietly said something. The Empress furrowed her brows slightly. A hint of worry appeared on her noble face. She sighed and said, "So it is because of the matter of the national treasury being empty. I also know about the repair work on the riverbanks. It has been delayed from the beginning of the year until now. It is all because of a lack of money. If I could make silver out of nothing, I could also resolve the emperor's worries." "What a pity," Hong Zhu chuckled and said, "the empress is the mother of the world. Why do you need to worry about these things? As for the national treasury, isn't there Minister Fan managing the Ministry of Revenue?" Hearing the words, Ministry of Revenue, the empress's eyes lit up. She pretended to ask carelessly, "Minister Fan has managed the Ministry of Revenue for many years. It can be said that he has worked hard and performed a great service. The emptiness of the national treasury is a problem of income. What can he do?" Hong Zhu was slightly startled. He wanted to speak but stopped. The empress looked at his expression and smiled disdainfully. "You are just a child, yet you have so many things on your mind." Hong Zhu jumped in fright and quickly knelt down. With a pained expression he said, "I wouldn't dare. It is just that in the royal study. I heard that the emperor flew into a rage yesterday and said that the Ministry of Revenue is incompetent. Furthermore, He lowered his voice and said, I heard, there are officials in the Ministry of Revenue who are in deficit and secretly diverting national funds. The amount is also very large, so the emperor is furious. The empress's heart jumped, but she immediately hid the expression on her face. Smiling slightly, she said, Don't tell me about these court matters. How has the emperor been feeling lately? What places do you often visit in the palace? Hongzhu glanced around and knew that this was a taboo in the palace. Gritting his teeth, he crawled to the empress's side and lowered his voice to say something. The empress's long, shapely eyebrows furrowed and immediately softened. Her lips trembled slightly. Her cheeks were pale. In a cold voice, she said, Xiao Lu, it's Xiao Lu again. After Hongzhu left the palace with a heart full of unease and fear, a young man flashed out from behind the screen. This young man was wearing a light yellow robe. The lines of his face were soft, and his eyes were clear and spirited. In the palace, other than the emperor, empress dowager, and empress, only the crown prince could wear this kind of clothing. Presently, the crown prince's body was much better than it had been 2 years ago. At least, much of the unhealthy whiteness on his face had faded. This was, of course, because of the emperor's strict discipline and not allowing him to waste too much energy on matters between men and women. It was also because he was gradually growing older and faced with complicated situations, as well as the pressure of his royal brothers step by step. This was a change he had no choice but to make. For the crown prince, in the past, his greatest enemy was the second prince. However, after the second prince was successfully beaten half of his body by Fan Xian, he suddenly discovered that Fan Xian, who he had thought was his greatest help, was actually also his father's son. Furthermore, he was the son of his father and that demoness. For the Eastern Palace, there had long been an unresolvable grudge with the Yi family. Thus, the crown prince was most wary of Fan Xian, who was far away in Jiangnan. Everyone knew that after Fan Xian's past was revealed, if the crown prince took the throne, Fan Xian would certainly not have a good end. If Fan Xian held power alone, he would certainly not allow the crown prince to take the throne. Mother, it seems that we can act on the matter of the Ministry of Revenue, the crown prince said as he listened to the empress and Hongzhu's conversation from behind the screen. The empress closed her eyes and thought for a moment. She then said, How trustworthy is this eunuch Hongzhu? 70%. The empress smiled slightly and said, I also think so. Hongzhu was originally an errand boy in the royal study at your father's side. His meteoric rise was just around the corner. Although he has been moved to the Eastern Palace and has risen 2 ranks to become the head eunuch, his power is far less than it was before. The crown prince said, if Fan Xian had not reported the matter of Hongzhu asking for bribes to father would not have angrily chased Hongzhu out. Everyone in the palace knew about this matter. They all knew the story of that day in the royal study. They all thought that the reason Hongzhu left the royal study was because he had offended the commissioner of the Overwatch Council, Fan Xian. The empress sighed and said, Let's see how the emperor deals with it. He truly likes Hongzhu, that little eunuch. The problem is, I am not sure if this matter is true or false. The crown prince furrowed his brows in deep thought and said, It should be true that Hongzhu holds a grudge against Fan Xian. The eunuchs and serving girls in the palace have all heard him speak of this matter through gritted teeth. As for father, even if he uses Hongzhu to monitor me, I have not made any mistakes in this half a year. The empress nodded. A murderous intent flashed through her phoenix eyes. She smiled coldly and said, As long as the reason for the emperor's anger is true, the matter of the Ministry of Revenue can be investigated. Fan Jian cannot remain in the Ministry of Revenue. Otherwise, with Fan Xian in charge of the palace treasury in Jiangnan and Fan Jian in charge of the national treasury in Jingdou, your future days will be difficult. The crown prince nodded and replied, I will always remember father's teachings and only do what father wishes to do. The empress furrowed her brows and said, In a moment, I will go to Guangxin Palace and ask for your aunt's opinion. Suddenly hearing the eldest princess' name, a strange light flashed through the crown prince's eyes. He immediately hid it well and said hesitantly, Should we ask my aunt's side to step in? The empress shook her head and smiled coldly. She is also not easy to get along with. Besides, now that the emperor has her live in the palace, isn't it also with the intention of monitoring her closely? If she is deep in the palace, it will not be easy for her to communicate with the officials in court. Although the way your father does things often looks simple, he is actually very clever. You have to learn more in this area. It has been very difficult for your aunt to move around recently. The nominal mother of the country sighed, but there was a sense of schadenfreude that could not be hidden between her brows. The eldest princess was too dazzling among the women of the Qin kingdom and had always faintly overshadowed the empress' elegance. How could she be happy? Now that her husband was becoming more and more displeased with her sister-in-law, although logically, the empress knew it was not a good thing, emotionally, she still couldn't help but feel a glimmer of joy. That shameless little vixen. I'm just going to let her know. The empress sighed and patted the crown prince's shoulder. For now, you have to endure the relationship between your aunt and the second prince. Don't remember what happened in the past. As for the matter of investigating the deficit in the Ministry of Revenue this time, I will find someone to do it, don't worry. A faint coldness surged between her brows. Although mother's paternal family has been completely wiped out by those wretched people, there are still some people hidden in court. As for Fan Jian, did he think he could hide it from the people of the world by moving so much silver from the national treasury to Jiangnan? Did he think he could hide it from the emperor? No matter how much the emperor likes Fan Xian, he would not allow this kind of thing to happen under his eyes. The crown prince was slightly shocked. No wonder the deficit in the Ministry of Revenue was so great. Fan Jian was so daring. Only now did he know that his mother and aunt had long grasped the root of the Ministry of Revenue's problem. No wonder they were so confident. The empress smiled slightly and said, after the Ministry of Revenue, the world will be peaceful for a few more days. Fan Xian will not be able to be as lively as he is now. Think about it carefully. In the emperor's heart, as long as you don't do anything out of line, even if you fight with those people, he will just pretend he didn't see it. In the end, you are still the crown prince. This is something everyone knows. The crown prince sighed. Throughout the history of dynasties, perhaps only I, the crown prince, have been the most useless. The empress smiled coldly and said, who knows how many crown princes in history lived worse than you before they took the throne? What are you afraid of? As long as you endure until the day you take the throne, there will be times when you can hold your head high. She continued coldly, Mother has concluded that the emperor still wholeheartedly wants you to succeed the throne. Naturally, I have my reasons. The crown prince anxiously said, but, although the second prince has fallen, the third prince has gone down to Jiangnan and has always been taken by Fan Xian. This was the matter that had been discussed the most in the palace recently. The third prince was young, yet he had followed the imperial envoy down to Jiangnan to oversee affairs. It was called learning, but was it to learn how to rule a country? Thus, the third prince's birth mother, Yi Guipin, became the center of the discussion. However, this woman of the Lu family remained silent and reserved. The empress glared at the crown prince and gritted her teeth. You're even so afraid of an ignorant child. What kind of future do you have? The crown prince gloomily said, I really can't see. Father has the intentions you speak of. If he didn't have those intentions, wouldn't he have destroyed you a long time ago? The empress had a tone of exasperation. The crown prince forced a smile and said, perhaps father is just looking for an opportunity. The empress shook her head and calmly said, you're wrong. Compared to the other brothers, you have one great advantage, but you yourself still can't see it. The crown prince asked in surprise, what advantage? There was a chill in the empress's calm expression. She slowly said, the great prince has Dongyi background. The second prince's birth mother, Lady Shu, also has some power in the capital. The third prince's birth mother, Yi Guipin, comes from the Lu family, which is a large family in the capital. She also has Fan Xian to rely on. Of all the princes, only we, mother and son, are alone without any family power to use. After all, the emperor and I have lived together for so many years. The empress smiled disdainfully. The empress smiled disdainfully and said, everything about your father is good, but he is too suspicious. If the throne of the Qin kingdom is to be passed down, of course, he is afraid that the Li family's royal power will fall to an outsider. Thus, when choosing a successor, he cannot accept the successor standing behind an overly large family power. Thus, the second prince can't, and the third prince even more so. The Empress's cold gaze was like two knives digging into the crown prince's heart. Only you, the emperor, had that old cripple kill your mother's family. One, it was for that evil demoness. Another, wasn't it to clear away obstacles for you in the future? Don't be afraid, my child. She gently stroked the crown prince's cold cheek and sighed. If there are no major problems, no matter how many tricks the emperor uses, it is all to urge you to grow and become strong. Many years ago, he had already chosen you, and he has never doubted his own choice. The empress smiled nervously and said, even if his choice was wrong to begin with. Her expression suddenly became severe. She gritted her teeth and said, so, do you understand? The reason you can have the position of crown prince and be able to ensure your future position is all because your mother's family paid with 3,000 lives. Those were your elders, your family. They are all dead. Their blood and corpses were used to pave this path to the imperial chariot for you. So, you must endure it until the day you succeed. A spring breeze floated through the royal palace, but this spring breeze was very cold and made one shiver in fear. The crown prince couldn't help but shiver because the Empress Dowager's great-grandmother was strict in managing the back palace. In reality, he had only recently learned the truth of the night Jingdo bled with blood from his mother's mouth. He knew that his grandfather and uncle had all died in that political turmoil. So, his father wanted to get rid of the relatives by his side. His heart began to tighten, and he didn't know how to react. If his mother's analysis was correct, then as long as he behaved calmly enough, and as long as there were no major problems in the world in the future, that dragon throne would ultimately be his. The crown prince's gaze gradually hardened. He looked at his mother and nodded his head heavily. Mother and son seemed to have forgotten what they had once said in their conversation. The prerequisite for the crown prince to succeed to the throne was that no major problems occurred. Everyone in the world knew, regardless of whether it was Qin Pingping or Sir Fan Jr., they were both sinister and ruthless people who were best at finding major problems from no problems. The palace and the court were actually two existences of one. Through the emperor, who could not be ignored, the two fields of power were perfectly and harmoniously united together. If the officials wanted to curry favor with the emperor, they had to curry favor with the nobles in the palace. If the nobles in the palace wanted to extend their hands outside the palace, they had to borrow the officials outside to do things for them. The so-called interest groups all came about this way. Thus, when the matter of the emperor losing his temper in the royal study regarding the Ministry of Revenue's deficit spread outside the palace through countless channels, the entire officialdom began to stir. The highest principle of being an official was that if the emperor did not like something, the officials had to quickly follow. Even if the person standing opposite the emperor was a legendary figure like the Grand Preceptor, the officials still had to bravely take the lead and not be willing to fall behind. With the emperor's mood as an indicator, this kind of thing would never go wrong. However, there was a clear time difference between the news from the palace and the reaction from the court conference. The officials were more steady and cautious than usual. One reason was because investigating the deficit of the Ministry of Revenue would inevitably involve the Minister of Revenue, Fan Jian. Everyone knew that not only was Fan Jian extremely shrewd and ruthless, but he also had a close relationship with Imperial Prince Jing and a brotherly relationship with the emperor. The officials didn't know what kind of affection the emperor still had for Fan Jian. The second reason the officials were careful was very simple. It was because Fan Jian's son was named Fan Xian, and his courtesy name was Enji. He was the commissioner of the Overwatch Council and the imperial envoy with full power in Jiangnan Road. Although everyone knew that Fan Xian was the emperor's illegitimate child, everyone also knew that Fan Xian's loyalty and filial piety were famous throughout the Qin kingdom. There were countless stories circulating among the people, such as refusing to recognize his father even when he died in the palace and risking his life to enter the Fan ancestral hall at the annual meeting. If the investigation reached Minister Fan, No one knew what kind of reaction Fan Xian would have. The officials only knew that the second prince had once wanted to use the second young master of the Fan Manor. In the end, he had angered Fan Xian. Fan Xian had used countless vicious and sinister moves to arrogantly beat the second prince, who had already become a powerful force, into two ends. He had been utterly defeated and cut a sorry figure. In the end, Fan Xian had successfully beaten the second prince into house arrest. This glorious battle result was enough to intimidate most of the officials who wanted to take advantage of politics. Sir Fan Jr. didn't even care about the second prince, much less these officials. However, the pressure from the palace was growing stronger and stronger. Furthermore, news from various sources had confirmed that the emperor indeed had the intention of taking action against the Ministry of Revenue. The true source of the emperor's unhappiness these days was the Ministry of Revenue. Thus, the restless officials finally suppressed their impulses and began to go home to write memorials. Among these officials, there were upright officials who sincerely served the country and hoped the court would stop investigating the Ministry of Revenue's deficit. There were also officials who had received the orders of nobles in the palace and wanted to use this matter to bring down the Fan family. They wanted to play a game of hitting a bull across the mountain and make Fan Xian, who was far away in Jiangnan, lose his reputation. Most of them were political opportunists who spent many years in the court trying to figure out the emperor's will in order to climb up. In short, for many different reasons, the Jingdo court officials had a rare unified opinion. They asked the court to thoroughly investigate the rumored deficit of the Ministry of Revenue. They had to give the people of the world and the emperor an explanation. It is difficult to guarantee that it will be within an hour, such as 12 o'clock or 1 o'clock. I hope everyone can understand. Thank you. You're tuning in to the Dreamy Chapters YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.